Welcome to the Atomic Level, the show where we decode the matters of wealth, one insightful conversation at a time with the rising stars in finance, business, and tech, so that you can grow and protect not only your net worth, but most importantly, your net happiness. And today I welcome back to the show the first ever live stream version of the show that we did at episode 18. So for those who are not yet familiar with Charlie Garcia, well, you should go subscribe right now and just become really familiar. You're going to get 2 hours of all the reasons why and a bunch more. But episode 18 has everything as a backstory that you want to know about kind of the writing, but the man himself, the worldview, the context, things like that. We're going to go deeper and we're going to get current today. We're going to go in directions we didn't go the last time. As the room fills up, please share and drag the link into your feed so that others can discover this. Charlie, welcome back for episode 53.
Wow. Well, thanks for having me back, Chris. I really enjoyed the first time together, especially since it was the first time on Substack that you used their platform to live stream. I've never done it yet. I probably should. And I just want to say I am extremely not only grateful to be alive, but grateful for the Substack community. You know, I started October 5th. Because I was frustrated with Market Watch. I have a column I write every week on Market Watch, but I really wanted to do more. So I published 5 days a week. The first 108 pieces were all free. And I never really wanted to go paid because, one, I don't need the money. And second, if somebody paid a subscription for a year, shit, now I got a job. I got to write for a year. And, but I'll tell you that the community has been amazing. I have about 3,000 subscribers, and sometimes the comment section, if you add it up, is 4 times the length of a 10,000 word article that I might write. And I learn a ton. And I'm so grateful. It's just a wonderful community of people, young to, you know, one of my members is, I think, 87 or 88 years old. And I learn more from them, I'm sure, than they learn from me. So
I think that's
a wonderful community.
Yeah, I think it's a great segue to kind of the frame I want to give everybody. I noticed in the chat, several people had the stream froze. If you can refresh, we're probably going to break Substack today, guys. So keep us posted on that. But if you can just refresh your screen, looks like Seth got that working. So keep me posted if you're having any issues or delays. But as a segue and to kind of frame up, Charlie, the discussion that we're going to go all over the map as we talked about briefly in the green room, but this is fully unscripted. So I honestly don't know where we're going to go in what direction, but I do know the frame that I want to anchor us in. And it's something I've been passionate about. I think you've demonstrated. So I've been writing about it. You are kind of like my use case, right? So the 4 things that we get to own in the future that will have disproportionate value as we essentially create abundant intelligence at scale are trust, context, taste, and coordination. That's kind of the way that I've put it into a framework that's easy. So when we think about trust, it's the only thing you can't automate. And trust is built by what I call attentions on deposit, right? Or attention on deposit. And in Substack, we're all trying to get someone's attention, whether we're trying to get it in a comment feed or through an article we write. One man that I've interviewed out of the last 35 that we've done live and the 53 total since we started Atomic Level has done that better than anyone. And that's been you. And the reason why I say that is not just as a compliment, it's because of the frame. So for those who have followed Charlie and who know him, subscribe to him already, if you haven't read, I think you call it M3, right? The Mischief Makers Manifesto.
You got it. My wife thought I was starting a revolution or something.
Yeah, if you haven't read that post that Charlie wrote, I think it's very grounding in broader context for everybody, not just as it relates to what you're trying to do and why you got here. And so I'm going to encourage everybody to go check that one out. We can put the link in here. It'll definitely be in the show notes if you're watching this on replay. But start there. And the reason why I say that is because that's about the context of why you're doing what you're doing. And one of the things that stood out to me when you wrote that is somewhere in there you said, I didn't start a Substack. I stopped avoiding it.
Well, I'm a big believer in, Matthew 25. One of my favorite parables is, and it's the only time in the Bible that I've ever seen where Jesus gets mad. I mean, so mad that he's going to send you to hell with teeth gnashing. And it's the parable of the master that has 3 servants and gives the most talented one, 5 talents, then 3, and then the last one, 1 talent. And he comes back in 2 years, and the first 2 have multiplied it, but the other one was afraid and took the talent and buried it. And I think what Jesus meant about this parable is that there's 8 billion people on the planet, but each one of us has gifts. And you need to find out and have the courage to invest that gift wisely. My gift happens to be reading, writing. When I went to the Air Force Academy, the first 3 weeks before school starts, you have to type 60 words a minute. Back when I went to school, guys took shop, girls took home ec, and we didn't know how to type. So I can type now about 160 words for a minute, but 3 weeks of speed reading where you had to read stuff and get a 90% or better in comprehension. And back then I was reading at a rate of about 3,800 a minute. And I think at the time, the guy that had the record was around 4,000. And I met him subsequently. So imagine, since the age of 18, the neuroplasticity of your brain of being able to read that fast. So I say 50, but it's sometimes like 100 books a year, and I type really fast. So writing has always been a gift. I've dreamed of having a column since I was a little kid. I've written 3 books that are in 15 languages. And I had this idea of writing a novel because I went to right after the pandemic, I went to Mexico. And it's like, what's your big, hairy, audacious goal? And I said, well, I want to bring peace among and between the Abrahamic religions. And these screenwriters were in the front. It's this group of creatives. They're like, how are you going to do that, Charlie? I said, I'm going to write a book. And they laughed. They said, you're an idiot. Not even your mother's going to read that book. Like, it's ridiculous. I said, well, thanks for the constructive feedback. What do you suggest? He said, did you go watch and read the Da Vinci Code? I said, yeah, and I saw the movie. He said, the only truth that exists are the stories we tell ourselves. That's it. So you got to change the story through a character that takes the message. And I said, well, that's easy. You guys are like famous screenwriters. I've never done that. I've not even, so write a novel. So I don't know how to write a novel. And then a woman was there and she introduced me to a guy, a friend of hers at Columbia University. And he had written 2 books and he taught creative writing. One got made into a movie by Spielberg and the other by Ford Francis Coppola. So I went to New York and met him. I hired him in 2021 and I paid $5,000 a month for a year. And he taught me the foundation. And tomorrow, my book I've been working on for literally 4 or 5 years is going to 25 beta readers and then to HarperCollins Christian. And we'll see how it goes. And I'm trying to decide now, because I've read a lot of Charles Dickens stuff, and the #1 book sales of all time out of the Bible and religious books is The Tale of Two Cities, 200 million. And he serialized this in 1859 when he had a magazine. There was no internet. So imagine typesetting and all that stuff. And I thought, and I've been talking to Substack, what if I serialize the novel? Because if I give it to HarperCollins, after we sign a contract, it'll be 18 months before the book sees the light of day. But I could serialize like 3 chapters a week on Substack. And I already have part 2. It's going to be a series, 50% done. and it'll be like Lee Child's Jack Reacher, which is on, I think it's on novel 29. But anyway, that's what I'm thinking about. And I haven't made a final decision yet, but if my gut tells me I should be doing this on Substack. The problem with Substack, they have 31 31 categories you got to pick from. And they have one, which is fiction. But if you go to the top 10 people in fiction, they're all teaching people how to write. It's not really fiction writers, although they have a whole bunch there, but nobody big.
One of the things, if I can just give you some brainstorm stuff, because I ran a publishing company. It was a very boutique publishing company that we acquired an interest in late 2009, early 2010. Ran it for 2 years, published 48 authors, all business book authors. So it wasn't fiction. We actually did one novel. Mark Becker was his name. Brilliant writer. He was kind of like a Patterson type writer, just Brad Thor, that kind of ilk. Right. But it wasn't our bailiwick. So we kind of did it. It was fun. It was great, but it wasn't like how our infrastructure was set up. I was set up to really do business books. But I say that because that's not the point. The point is, it's not a binary decision. And one of the things that we did back then, and I was on a panel with HarperCollins head of acquisitions one time at this book thing with about 400 authors. And it was so funny because this is like when Flipboard, if you remember Flipboard.
Yeah.
App, this was like when Flipboard was kind of having a moment. I'm thinking it's mid 2010-ish. The iPad was less than 3 months old. Like we're talking June-ish, July 2010. And our thing was at that time, mid-list authors, which are the bulk of authors, were seeing advances go from whatever used to be something worth doing down to like 420K, 4K, barely anything.
The funny thing is I'm not doing it because of the book, because the book won't do anything. I need a major feature film based on the book. And maybe I can do it. So let me get you the cover. Hold on.
Yeah.
This is what it looks like.
Satoshi versus Goliath. Oh, beautiful. Oh, yeah. I've seen it on your website. So here's my point.
Yeah.
I don't know that you need to set up. First of all, I don't think you set up a separate Substack with a category. I think you could set up on your current Substack because it's your name.
No, the problem with that is, let's say the 23,000 subscribers I have, maybe only 5,000 read fiction or would enjoy it. So I don't want to. I think what I'm going to do is like part one, I'll replace my Saturdays where I'm reviewing books with 3 chapters a week for 5 or 6 weeks until chapter. And then I'll just tell people, hey, if you enjoyed this, you want to continue, go to this other Substack. And I was the first person in the US to publish a book in English and Spanish simultaneously. And I think what I'd like to do is do it in English and Spanish. Because then I can get comments on, what people are enjoying or not. I can actually narrate it myself in English and Spanish since I'm bilingual. So I'm thinking really about doing
There's another idea. So there's another idea. Serializing it as articles, but also audiobook. These are all different rights. Right? So like HarperCollins is going to take whatever rights they can, unless you tell them what they can and can't have. So you can do carve-outs, right, before you sign the contract.
Yeah, no, I did that with my first book. I carved out Spanish language, and I did that myself.
If you can carve out serialized versions, if you can carve out the trademark copyright, if you can carve out everything but print distribution.
My issue is the 18 months. It'll take them 18 months to see the light of day. And one of the things that convinced me to keep writing, even on Substack, was on January 22nd of this year, I'm going back home from an R360 meeting, and I get a call. I had just seen my brother in Miami like 2 days ago, and my nephew, who's 18, came home from high school, and his dad was dead in the living room. And I'm like, what? And we ended up doing an autopsy. It took us about 30 days. And my brother didn't drink. He worked out 4 days a week. He was preparing for a trial. he was on his phone, not his he didn't have his glasses on, and he tripped in the living room, fell over backwards so he couldn't break his fall, and his head hit a coffee table, snapped his neck, and he died instantly at the age of 59. And about a week later, I had been invited to the National Prayer Breakfast in Washington, D.C. And one of the R360 members said, "Hey, Charlie, I'm going to do you a big solid today." I said, "What's that?" And he was an organizer of the whole National Prayer Breakfast. President Trump spoke. There was like 7 or 8 other presidents that spoke as well. And he's doing the closing dinner speech. And then the night before, there's a big dinner. And he said, "I'm going to put you at the head table with the guy who won the Nobel Peace Prize for feeding 120 million people during the pandemic. You're going to be right next to him." I'm like, "Hey, Michael, thank you, man. I really appreciate it." And he said, but I want to ask you one favor." I said, yeah, anything for you. What can I do? What do you want? "Before he speaks, I want you to get up for 5 minutes in front of everybody, presidents, senators, congressmen, foreign leaders, and talk about your relationship to Jesus Christ." And then next thing you know, someone pulled him away. And I'm like, I'm still grieving for my brother. And I call Christina, my wife, and she's like, "You're not going to do it, right? I mean, this is like in 90 minutes. And anyways, I decided to do it anyways. And I've never cried in public, and the grief of my brother hit me, and all these weird things had started to happen to me. And the message that I received was like, "Hey, you have a purpose." Matthew 25 is on your website. If you go to charliepgarcia.com, you'll see it. You know what your damn purpose is. And if you're not going to do it and get to it, well, look at what happened to your brother, just like that. So it was almost like the carrot and the stick, that I have this gift to write, to create trust, to speak my mind. And the things that are going to come out in this book, my wife is already like, you're going to have a fatwa on your head, and they're going to come after you, which doesn't worry me. But there's some wild stuff that I've uncovered that, and I'm a man of faith. I read every morning, Book of Genesis I'm reading now, and I meditate and I pray. If you see that painting behind me, it was made in Israel, and it's the 72 Hebrew names of God. And I have a card deck with 72. And the first thing I do in the morning is I shuffle and I pick one of the cards, and I dedicate the day so that I feel that I'm alive for a reason. My dad died at 61. I'm already older than him. My brother died at 59. And, I have 3 grandkids, and I want to be around for a while. So I am going to get to it. I have on my desk, because it may ring at any moment, this is a walkie-talkie with a 5,000 mile range.
Oh my God, you have one of those. I actually have those in my shopping cart. I think I know the brand, because I just
my grandson Ezra, and I named the main character after him. If he just presses the button, which he's not allowed to until 7 o'clock when he's brushed his teeth and you go to bed, he loves eagles. So I'm Eagle 1, he's Eagle 2. So it'll be like, Eagle 1, Eagle 2, come in. So we'll
awesome.
have a little discussion. He wants to be a secret agent like his grandpa.
That's awesome. Yeah, I actually looked at. I don't know if it's the same brand or not, but I saw those the other day, and I was telling my wife, like, I'm getting one of these, because I hate.
They're very cool, but they're very loud, and you can get like 5 at a time. I could have like all my kids with one, but
right. I saw like a 3 or a 5 pack. I can't remember, and I was like, yeah, they weren't too bad. I was like on X, like scrolling.
They're not that expensive. They're like $200, I think, for this one.
That's cool. Eagle 1 and Eagle 2.
So Mischief Makers is, it's a community of people. Last Friday, I think, or Thursday, one of my founding members, I have about 300 founding members, was on his way back to South Carolina, and he wanted to have lunch. And I thought about it. So I did some research on him, and it turns out he's a medical doctor from Indiana. And during the pandemic, he refused to take the COVID shot. And this is a doctor who saves kids, pediatric. And he ended up losing his ability to work for 2.5 years. And now he's the medical director of a hospital in South Carolina. So I'm like, oh, I definitely got to meet this guy. So he and his wife and his kids were there. He's a devout Catholic. So is his wife. And he said, look, I did it because of faith. He sued. It went to the appellate court. The appellate court agreed with him, but still went against him. And these are some of the rebels that kind of gravitate to me. And I think what you said about trust is 100%. Like, how do you trust anything in the news now? When I used to write for CNN, every sentence that I wrote had to have 2 footnotes, and the editors would check everything. But when Trump ran the first time, journalists stopped being journalists, and it's like, no, we're going to convince people that this person is Hitler, and we're not going to use journalistic standards. And now everything is freaking propaganda,
So I want to get into the stuff that you've been writing recently. For those, again, who are just joining the stream, welcome. We've got Charlie Garcia on. Episode 18 is a great source to kind of understand where he came from, both prior to this part of his life, because he's advised 6 presidents. He's done a lot of things. He's had a life more than most of us could accomplish in one lifetime. He's done in a year. So episode 18 on Atomic Level, you can get that. It was a 2-hour dive. We did it very ad hoc that time, and it's a great resource. His Substack has grown almost by a complete double since then. He's consistently been in the top 10, been number 1 for several weeks in a row in both bestsellers and rising. And the thing that most people know that they are subscribed to him, if you're not, I encourage you to, I am, is I'll spend almost as much time sometimes writing a comment to one of Charlie's pieces as I do writing my own piece. And I'm not alone. I think it's a very unique thing I've seen only in your Substack. And if you go, the proof is in the data, right? The receipts are there. You look at every post, there's hundreds of hearts. There's dozens, if not hundreds of comments. And some of these comments are 1,000 words, right? And it's like the fact that there is this true back and forth discussion, the salon, the room that you talk about in your manifesto, was not only by design, but also has now been by participation of this collective band of, as you call them.
I used to read the Dear Abby, so it was kind of a Dear Abby, but this is a Dear Charlie. I feel bad that I only let you comment if you're paying a subscriber, because that's like 3,000. It'd be too much. But I do publish for free on Fridays and Saturdays, where anybody, you don't have to be a paid subscriber, can comment. But as it grows, obviously there's going to be a point where I'm not going to be able to stay up till 2 a.m. answering everybody, and my wife comes with the hook screaming at me to get to bed.
Yeah, I think that's the thing too, is that there's scaling the unscalable, which is, the interesting piece of what you've done. Is the unscalable is actually taking the time to read it, taking the time to comment thoughtfully, get back and forth in the discourse. The debate you had with a woman the other week around the towers, and you guys, again, we're not going to do a deep dive on everything he's written. You can go check out what he's written and see the comments, but I'm referencing some of these because just the thoughtfulness around how you kind of went toe to toe, and this person in the community went toe to toe with you, but fact-based.
That was Petra. She's a brilliant woman, lives in Italy, amazing analyst. And look, everybody is entitled to their point of view. And I just, hey, I'm not saying that I'm right, but she brought up some really amazing comments. I didn't agree with them, so I stated my case. But I want people to
Well, and then
disagree with me.
you did the fact checking is the point.
Yeah.
Like you went in and you went, you know what? I'll concede this one, but on these two, here's some facts you don't have.
If I'm wrong, I'll say I'm wrong. So,
Yeah, so
and I'm wrong a lot.
Yeah, so I think the point is that it's not about being, you're not pandering, and the audience isn't pandering to you. And yet at the same time, it's very clear no one is there to troll. And if they are, then they're probably not lasting very long.
I've only banned one person in 200 and I don't know 20 articles now that was just blatantly racist and kept making inappropriate comments. But my wife also says, why do you have to answer everybody? Like, they take you into the mud. And I said, I don't know. I guess it's a defect. I was born that way. That I was a boxer in college. I did special ops stuff, and I don't mind it, And now, if you look at my founding members, I will bet 20 of them were people that came at me really hard, and through this long discussion, we became friends.
Right.
And they may not agree with me, but now we're friends. So it's funny how things like that happen.
Well, and it's so
and people don't argue anymore. It's ridiculous.
Well, and I want to talk about the Saturday format that is always free that you do, because I think it's one of the biggest values. If somebody just subscribes for free and they just tune in on Saturdays, the library. I want to talk about that in a second, but I want to put a little bit more contextual frame. I'm going to drink my own Kool-Aid, right? So I told everybody that the disproportionate things that we get to own that'll make real wealth and also network effects happen are trust, context, taste, and coordination. So we'll talk about those things throughout this, because I want to have it invalidated if it can be better, or anchor it for everybody in something that you can.
And how do you define the coordination piece?
The orchestration. So basically being able to pull the value out of those other three elements and become kind of a force, like execution layer of goodness or of value creation, right? Yeah. So the coordination is where the value gets created, because it's kind of like the easiest analogy is I have flour, sugar, water. These are ingredients, right? So trust, taste, coordinate, or context, flour, sugar, water. But that doesn't make me a 5-star Michelin chef. That just gives me, right? So the coordination is the ability to take those other three things and repeatedly put them into an end product, whatever that product may be.
And get your 3rd Michelin star.
Right. So your Michelin star of Substack, in my opinion, is based on the way that you consciously, unconsciously have done these things. Because again, I look at everything through the lens of my own biases, and just like everybody else, and I'm happy to disclose where those biases come from.
Totally been unconscious. I got to tell you that. I mean, I do not attribute anything to me. Everything is, in my opinion, the hand of the divine working through me. And I honestly believe that with all humility. And I amaze myself that these things happen. And I'm so grateful to be alive. And I really feel I have this message that needs to get out, and I have a purpose. And with everything I do, from R360, I have almost 200 members now, average net worth $600 million. We want to touch 3 billion people on the planet in a positive way for the benefit of humanity. Taking these entrepreneurs, 19 didn't go to college, 12 didn't graduate from high school, half of the 12 are billionaires. Generosity of spirit is a big part of their life. I've taken, June and July off for vacation to finish my novel, but now in August, I go back into the world of R360, where we're helping these individuals create a legacy with the wealth that they've created. And many grew up super poor, and they had really bad, awful stuff happen to them as kids. And that wound, that wound is what drove this creation of great wealth. Now they don't want to be that person anymore. They want to really focus on their family and use their wealth to benefit the world. And that's the other world that I'm kind of in most of the time when I'm not writing, so I feel blessed to
we
be able
both
to do what I do. And it, a lot of it is coincidence. I believe a coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous in our life. Even meeting you, like how did we met?
Well, I'll tell you how that works, right? So part of it is surrender, like that's my version of it, and to being useful.
Surrender. Let me show you. Hold on. This is a rock I did with 25 vets on an island, and that's what came to me.
That's
Surrender.
awesome. So part of it is surrendering to being useful, right? So I've been writing for 20 some odd years in one way, shape, or form. Wealth Matters, the first edition I wrote with my father back in 2007, right? When I had stupid rings on my hand, I'm wearing a suit, I had hair, the cover is a classic collectible. But I'm proud of the fact that 20 years later, July next year will actually be the 20th anniversary of kind of Wealth Matters as a concept. But the point being, surrender to being useful means some level of desiring that's where you want your purpose to be. I want to be useful to whoever you think that is. And I've been given a mouth, and I've been given the gregarious nature and a little bit of talent and those things, a very active mind and somewhat of a boldness. And so how we met was I took what I had through the context of wanting to be useful. I discovered your work. I looked at who you were, and I was like, okay, well,
But what I love about you is that you
cold call him. I just DM'd you, and I'm like, he's not going to reply, but I'm going to reply to guy. I'm going to pick people like him to go ask to be on the show. And you actually were one of the first people to reply to. A couple hours later, you're like, hey, yeah, I'd love to be on. You didn't know crap about me. So part of it is just saying yes. Part of it is not asking for permission for things that you don't need to ask permission for, right? If you had a thing that said no messages unless you pay me, then I would have skipped you. I would have skipped you because there was plenty of people that had big followings and good writing that didn't have that.
Right.
But I understand why they have it.
But what I love about you have an audience also of financial advisors, so you can influence a lot of people that are advising people how to manage money, which I think is great. Well, that type of audience.
I think that's the lever point. Just like you, it's kind of like, where can I be useful? Well, if there's a lot of people on Substack. So this was, again, just back and forth, kind of how it evolves, right? I'm going, okay, ATOMIQ Level. I love the brand. I wanted to do it forever. I was like, that's a perfect name for a show, but I've done podcasts for 20 years in different forms, Web3 show, all kinds of stuff. I was like, I don't need to prove to myself I can do another podcast, and I don't want there to be a podcast to nowhere. Who the hell am I going to do it for? And I couldn't figure it out. For a year and a half, I sat on it. Anybody who's been around Wealth Matters, there was a thing on my Substack, literally said ATOMIQ Level for 19 months without an episode, because I just couldn't figure out what am I going to do the episodes for. And then as I started to find out people like yourself, I went, God, there's people out there that are just giving way better advice on where to put your money. They're leading with their own dollars. They're doing better. Analysts, Brent Johnson, some of these guys, Michael Gray, I'm like, I'm not that guy. But what I am is I'm the guy who can help make sense of it. I can humanize it. And guess what I can do? Maybe I can get people that want to protect their wealth. So then I was like, well, what can I do? Well, I can build a business that is what my life experience has been, making more money and losing more money than I ever thought I would, learning the hard way, right? So I'm like, that I can stand on. I can show you how to architect yourself to prevent unwanted loss. But I'll go interview the people that'll show you how to make more of it. Because now I don't have to be credible as the guy who can make more of it. I just can get more density of the people, and you can choose your adventure.
And I go back and forth on this because I'm a contrarian value investor focused on yield. But that's 90%. But 10% of what I do is I look for asymmetric bets where I don't mind betting $1 and losing $1 to make 10. And what I've brought to Substack is really the contrarian value investor focused on yield, because at the end of the day, wealth comes from compounding and being like Buffett, where you buy and you just don't sell unless things turn around. And and I've run 2 hedge funds, and we talked about that stock trading competition where everybody got $1 million, and in 1 year I took it to 120 million, and CNN covered it, and I enjoy it, but I'm afraid of bringing that to Substack because younger people, it's the kind of stuff that you should be doing with maybe 5% of your liquid assets. But when you're young or inexperienced, and I'm just afraid of putting stuff out there that is going to harm people. But I do like Citrini Research. I pay $10,000 a year for their institutional stuff. They have a book, and they're up probably 300% in the last few years, and they have updates and stuff like that. So I'm still toying around with that idea. I don't know if I'll do it or not, because I would have to be convinced that people aren't going to get hurt.
Well, I think right now, again, the lane that you're in, and I'm saying this because it isn't mine. I mean, if it was, I have like the healthiest form of envy / I'll call it respect for your channel, and I'm part of it. Like I'm happy to be part of it as a subscriber and like as a contributor whenever I can be, because I gain from it way more than I give to it, even though I try and give as much as I can. So I can't say that you should change anything personally, like for me, because when it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? And you haven't over-engineered it to date, but it's very well designed. And the reason why I know it's designed is because I've run it through, just like you have some frameworks. And I love that post you did a couple of weeks ago about like the 32 that got into the door on each floor of the NVIDIA trade, right? And then, and then the 8 that actually made it through the gauntlet, like that framework alone.
I think teaching a process versus the, ideas come and go, but if you can give people a process and a filter, that's a lot better. And then the other thing I try to do is, my family office spends a little over $100,000 a year on all this research that I read daily. And if I can say, hey, you can pay $720 a year for a subscription, but I'm going to bring you all this stuff, and obviously I got to be careful on how I attribute it, because, I'm reading this stuff that I'm not supposed to share, but I can certainly synthesize it and tell people, hey, this came from this person, that person. And I'm kind of more of a filter of what's going on. But, you have people that are always bearish. You have people that are always bullish. So you got to look at these signals, I think, like anything else, with a grain of salt.
I think that's the thing. Back to the Saturday piece, because I think that's one of the biggest values that some people may or may not be aware of, but I relate to. My life started with books. Like I came out of, a father that taught gym and health and was a coach. Mom stayed at home pretty much. Middle class life when there was one. Trenton, New Jersey, right? Trenton makes the world takes. Thank God it took me. And books were always something that were treasured. My father was always reading, but like I wasn't a reader. Played football through college and all that. Prose doesn't work out, right? So now what am I going to be? 25, 26 years ago. And back then there was no Substack. There was no YouTube. There was no any of this stuff, right? So I went to Barnes & Noble and Borders, and I went in with my credit card because I was in grad school about 12 months into a master's degree, 20 grand in student debt. And I'm like, I'm worth 30 grand a year still. I need, and so I literally made the decision, I've got to get new information inside this dome. Well, the only way you could do it back then, silly as it sounds, was audiobooks, CDs, which were novel, right? And so I went to Borders and Barnes & Noble and just would figure out what was next on the shelf. I didn't care. So I started with the obvious, like Tony Robbins, right? And I found Kiyosaki and Rich Dad Poor Dad. Okay, great. Think and Grow Rich was the first book I read that kind of flipped the switch.
Hold on. Grab that one.
Yeah. So
the original name was Law of Success.
I have those.
1,200 pages.
Yeah.
And if you go to the back, I always read it with a pen, so I'll showcase, like I can go back and see what I really hit me. But that's
Yeah, so the laws of success,
classic.
one of the ones, I know you wrote some of this about James Allen, and we talked about that. One of my favorite ones that I discovered years later was Charles Haanel, which was banned by the Catholic Church back in the night, but it was like 1911, he precursor to all that. I swear to God, Napoleon Hill must have sat under the tutelage of him, because if you've ever read the Master Key System, which is open public domain, you can get it just by Googling it and download the whole thing for free. The Master Key System is literally like, it's like direct from source. I mean, it's unbelievable. It's one of my favorites. The point is, I spent $32,000 on credit cards that year.
On books.
On books.
Wow,
and
that's a lot.
A couple of that was seminars. I went to a couple of seminars because, you start doing this stuff and everybody's like, oh, you need to come to my workshop. So then I'm in a Brian Tracy thing, learning how to sell, and Zig Ziglar's getting me at the back table with all his stuff. And I say that because I'm so grateful for it, but it was an expensive way to get that knowledge. And I didn't really know what to do with it, but it shaped me forever. So I fell in love with the notion of democratizing access to that when YouTube and all those things first started doing it. But as the noise level gets higher, right, you're missing context. So what I love about your Saturday thing is you take all of your lens. You've been in the Situation Room. You've been in all that. And you basically go, I read 50 books a year, plus all the other years I've read all these other books, how many that is now, 5,000 books. And I'm going to tell you the 3 that I care about this week based on this context of what's happening over the next 3 months. That alone is worth an email address and a subscription, simply because no one can live your life and scoop up all of that pain, pleasure, knowledge, wins, losses, and then go, what are the books?
Right. Well, the reason I do it is
true.
The 5th commandment is to honor our parents. And I do it to honor my father. So the first book I ever read, I think I was very young. It was A Message to Garcia. And my father had an original copy that was given to him when he was a heart surgeon in Georgetown. He operated on the author's son because he died the Lusitania attack. But and it came from like 1899. And then my dad had a very big library. He would read 5 newspapers a day. And at dinner, he would quiz us on current events. And then my allowance, there was 4 of us. I had a brother and 2 sisters. And my father would assign you a book to read. And on Saturday, he would quiz you on the book. And based on your answers, you would get an allowance or no allowance. And that drove to me a love of reading. And my father read all kinds of historical books, and he would talk and teach me things that he learned. And I think, if you can read a book and learn 1 or 2 or 3 things and read actively. So I read novels for pleasure, but if it's a nonfiction book, I always have a pen in my hand. And I'm taking notes on the margin because you retain things. And I think that, I think it's particularly biographies or history, you can just learn a ton from. And because, when you can read 3,800 words a minute or more, you can absorb a book a day, basically. So they're just great teachers. I love libraries. When I was in college, I always studied in the library, and books are my friends. So I honor my father by that Saturday thing. And, he died many, many years ago, but I think about him and I wish he were alive because he would read these and he would be telling me what I should be writing about this coming week based on what was going on in the world. He would say, you should, and I'd probably agree. So it's too bad that he's not around. And now I hope that my 3 grandkids, I can give them that same love of reading as well.
Well, I think, again, the way that you do that on Saturdays, everybody probably has their favorite post of the week from you, and then it changes based on the week. But I'm encouraged to say this because I didn't think there's any books that you haven't read. And the thing that you demonstrate the most to me that I want to give everybody kind of a Charlie-esque like little Saturday gift on Tuesday is the way I want to frame the rest of this discussion, because I want to get into some of the other things that we see around AI, around market, like some of these other macro things that are happening. We got big meetings tomorrow, You know, you got Warsh, you got the trial with Fauci happening. We got all kinds of stuff happening this week. And we can look at it through noise or signal. But the frame that I want to give you is 2 books that I mentioned in the green room. I was curious if you'd read it. I don't think you had, or
no, and I think I may have to read them. And
I want to see your take on
cover them this Saturday. 2 of them I may add, but
I want to see what your take on these 2 is, because again, not just because I actually respect your take so much that even if it's completely different than mine, I want to know what it is, right? So my take on these 2 books is they are easily in my top 10. One of them's in my top 5. So the one, they might both be. One of them is definitely in my top 5, which is Rebecca Costa, friend of mine. She's now retired. Not sure where she is these days, maybe in Oregon. Years ago, 2012, I think the book came out. 2011, I met her when it was in publication. She didn't sign with us. She was signed with Vanguard.
And the title of the book is?
The Watchman's Rattle.
The Watchman's Rattle.
Right. So The Watchman's Rattle is based on, and if you can find it, I encourage you to get the original edition. I haven't read the second one, but I'm not sure there was 2 publications. Get the hardback if you can. That's the one.
I already ordered it since we talked. So
the Watchman's Rattle, and then the second book, just to skip ahead, is Connectography. I'll get to the 5 things to take away that frame the rest of this discussion for context. So the thing about Watchman's Rattle in short was, it was a warning, right? So back in like the revolutionary days, you'd shake the rattle and say, trouble's coming, like the British are coming, right? So what was the warning? The warning she was talking about was, they did all this research, and she studied under E.O. Wilson, who was a famous sociobiologist, some people may know. He had a saying that she requoted that was, we are ruled by our Paleolithic emotions, governed by medieval institutions, living amongst godlike technologies. Now, he said that like 60 some odd years ago, or 50 some odd years ago. Don't quote me on when he said it, but that's true today, right? So that was the basis. And the idea was that human biology evolves over millions of years. We're not that far out of the cave, even though we're talking now across the country on, bits and atoms, right? We're not that far out of the cave. And yet we invent complexity in picoseconds. And so the simple example way back then was, the iPhone was a couple years old. It was like, none of us knew how it worked. What do we all do when it freezes? We just literally hold the button down and pray it turns off, and then wait, because none of us actually know how to fix it, including the person that made it, right? So because they didn't make the whole thing, they made parts of the thing. So as complexity outpaces our ability to understand things, we can't solve the problems we create. That's the thesis, right? So when that starts to happen, what shows up in society? How do we know on the street, in Main Street? How do we know that's happening? Here was the 4 takeaways from that book. Counterfeit correlation.
Yeah.
Called it Clavenisms, right? So anyone who's a friend of the Cheers era back in the 80s, right? Cliff Clavin. It is narrative heavy explanations. It's spin, it's cherry pick data to validate our already existing thing, right? This and that are going up because of this. Liquidity drives all this. Like these irrational correlations we make. So that was number 1. You start to see that at scale. The other thing that you start to see at scale is substituting belief, right, for knowledge. So you start substituting facts with belief. And this could be seen in politics, it could be seen in markets, it could be seen in everything, right? And why that happens is because we get access to a number of information points that outpace our ability to contextualize them and organize them in a meaningful way. So we think we're getting smarter, but information is more noise than it is knowledge. And so we don't organize it into something that we can act on effectively. The other one that you see is gridlock. And then the last thing is inherited problems. Gridlock is our paralysis caused by complexity.
Right. And I think, she wrote that in 2012. And remember, I think it was around 2012, 2013 that the things started going vertical because more people had the smartphone, and all these kids are on Instagram and da 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 da.
Well, Facebook was right at that point hitting kind of scale its first billion users.
And if you look at kids with ADHD, anxiety problem, depression, also skyrocketing at that point. And I know because I was raising kids at the time, but one of the interesting things they talked about at the National Prayer Breakfast, that in the last year, which was 2025, more people bought a Bible than the last 100 years combined.
Mm-hmm.
And more kids, I've written about this on Market Watch, in England and France and the US, young kids are like putting their digital phones away and going back to church and looking for meaning and purpose. So I think she was absolutely right. And then the pendulum swung so far that now it's starting to, swing back.
Well, the interesting thing about it was at the same time, I was like the third or fourth time I had read through The Fourth Turning by Neil Howe and William Strauss.
Yeah.
A lot of your readers probably
Not only have I read it, but I've talked to one of the authors who's alive. I interviewed
Neil. So in 2012, Occupy Wall Street was happening. I was trying a pilot show with Rebecca Costa called Countermeasures with Rebecca Costa. That was basically like a video vlog version of her book every week, right? She was doing a radio show, it was doing well, was selling books. And I was like, well, let me do a video show with you, produce it in LA. So that's how I got to know her. We did 8 episodes. It didn't work. We were way too early. It was an expensive thing, but it was fun experience. What I got to do that was like kind of the little, Chris thing was I got to take some of my hero writers. I had Neil Howe and Rebecca Costa on the same show, him coming at it from the generational data archetype and her coming at it from the evolutionary biology. I had G. Edward Griffin on with her talking about the creature from Jekyll Island and the Federal Reserve during Occupy Wall Street as it was happening, and her coming at it from the evolutionary biology side. So I got this like nerd out moment to kind of sit in a room, and we made zero money, right? Like it was the worst. Like I think we lost $40,000 on that production.
But you had fun.
And I got to watch these people talk. And I got to just absorb it, right? And so my point is that Watcher and Zerato was one of those books that I think is more relevant today than even when it was written. Connectography, the thing about that, Parag Khan has written, I think, 8 or 9 best-selling books.
Right.
Really smart guy, well-known all around a lot of the circles out of Asia. But the book that jumped out of me that is one of my top 10 is Connectography, because he talked about how essentially infrastructure and connectivity is destiny, not geography is destiny. And the book's been studied. They built a map, both I think at MIT and Harvard, that really looked at the supply chain, the connection points, where the fiber lies, what borders it crosses over, how capitals flow. They looked at everything that essentially drives commerce and community. And the thesis of that book really lays out how infrastructure is destiny. This is something you're writing a ton about when you're talking about tungsten, when you're talking about bits and atoms, when you're talking about the AI CapEx trade, when you're talking about the 8 companies that lease everything else to NVIDIA, right? Those things are all fit inside of this notion that infrastructure is destiny, and that mega cities and mega communities, whether they be physically collected by a border or not, whether they be a Substack community or not, are going to be more powerful than nation states. And so those contextual frames validate those things I said we have to try and own and collectively put to value, right? Which are trust, taste, coordination.
Yeah, and trust is also, truth. I love the statement. They say, George Orwell said it, but there's some disputes whether he did or not. But I love it, and it's in a time of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. I mean, if you live in London now, you'll go to jail by telling the truth. It's and in the United States, we don't know what a man and a woman is anymore. And we're going to have Dr. Fauci testifying tomorrow. And, just getting down to the truth is what I love to write about. And I also write with a lot of satire because I like to point out hypocrisy wherever I find it,
Yeah. Well, and I think you have a lot to say there, because I think you do it in a way that, again,
I try to be funny. Like when I'm my mother passed before I started on Substack, but I would take a Market Watch article and I'd read it. And if she didn't laugh or chuckle 3 or 4 times, I had to like start again, because I do love to entertain, and I love authors that make me laugh a few times, and I always keep coming back to them because I'm going to learn and be entertained at the same time. So that's kind of my style, and my mom would keep me honest. Sometimes I'd like have jokes against the Pope and stuff like that, and she would like grab her rosary and start praying and tell me to take that out or I'm going to go to hell. But and sometimes I would, just because I know my mom was reading my stuff. But other than her,
What have you learned? What's your process for if you were to teach all of us how to be better at discourse, respectful debate, making an argument, but being open to being wrong, but like not because it sounds good and because I want to sound intellectually smart or like I give a shit, but genuinely because I'm curious to know if I'm wrong. What is your process? Like, how would you teach that to an eighth grader or to a 28-year-old or to a 38-year-old or a 60-year-old?
Everybody that goes or is going to go to law school, I try to convince not to go. But I went to Columbia Law. I was the first person in my class to publish on the Law Review. And what I learned in law school is, you'd be in class, you'd read the case, and they'd say, okay, Chris, you argue this side, Charlie, you argue that one. And you got to do it whether you agree with that side or not. And then they'd say, okay, switch. And you'd have to just as passionately argue the other side. So 3 years of that like legal training was super helpful. But then I was also an intelligence analyst at the highest level, working with presidents, working with a 4-star general who became my first real mentor and almost a second father, General John Galvin, who was the NATO Supreme Allied Commander. And when you're digesting like tons of information, you have to figure things out, and it's just raw data. And one of the things I learned was I was in Nicaragua, Honduras, El Salvador with people shooting at you back in the 80s. You had terrorism, guerrilla warfare. You had a revolution in Nicaragua. And I became friends with journalists from the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, Dallas Morning News, that I was like 22, 23, 24 years old. They were in their early 30s, and they took me under their wing. And I became a photographer for them. I was fluent in Spanish, but I acted that I didn't really speak a lot of Spanish. And they got me into these incredible places. Then when I went to work for this 4-star general, all the colonels and everybody else was reading the same highly classified information. I would go into this little booth, and they had this phone called a Stu 2, where you talk classified information with someone. So I would tell one of these journalists to go to the embassy, get to a Stu 2. They would allow them to use it. I would call them and say, hey, I'm reading all this stuff, and it seems this, that, and they just came back from the field with these commanders, and they would say, oh, that's bullshit. What's really happening is this, that, and the other. And by taking raw data and piecing it with people that I respected, and back then, journalists were real investigative journalists. And if you're working back then for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, everybody has a bias, a frame of mind. And if you're going to talk to this person, he's going to be pushing this agenda, and you sift that with all the other information, and you make an analysis. And in journalism back then, you would say, this is the case, but then these people say this. So you're always looking at the opposite, and
right.
You're always giving people 2 points of view. Well, that doesn't happen anymore. Well, I was trained under that system, and I would brief these generals, and this first briefing, I predicted all this stuff was going to happen. And the colonels were like, where the hell did you get that? They didn't know. If they knew I was talking to these journalists, I'd get court-martialed. And then the next day, they wouldn't let me brief. And on Wednesday, everything I predicted happened. And then this 4-star general is like, where's that young lieutenant who called all this stuff on Monday? So by Friday, I was briefing again. And I had written something in the military newspaper that appeared on a Friday in the middle of the paper. And the general saw it after my briefing. And then he opened a Spanish language newspaper, and there's a column that I had written in the op-ed. So he's like, who the hell is this guy? So that's how, he called me into his office. And for the next 2 years, I formed a command briefing team. And anytime he traveled to Latin America or went to brief the U.S. Congress, I would go with him. And back in those days, you had those, those slide projectors with the little wheel that would go around.
The carousel.
Yeah, I had the hour, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, and I had it in English and Spanish. And he would say, okay, I want you to do this. I want you to do that. And I briefed so many presidents of foreign countries and military leaders. And I learned a ton. So and then I wrote a cover story for U.S. News and World Report magazine in 1987 because I did a major study on Cuban influence in the region. General Galvin got it declassified. He was from Boston, and he sent it to Mort Zuckerman, who was one of his buddies. Mort Zuckerman was a real estate tycoon, but he owned U.S. News and World Report magazine. So he flew down to Panama with a guy named Mike Kramer, who was his chief political correspondent. I gave him this presentation, and I had written a 300-page report on Cuba. Galvin got it declassified to about 108 pages, and they took that and they ran with the cover story. And then Mort offered me a job, like, hey, if you ever leave the military, I want you to come write for me. But he was on the regional panel for the White House Fellowship in Boston. So he said, you should be a White House Fellow. And I'm like, what's that? So he told me that every year, 14 people get selected to work for the president, vice president, or directly for a cabinet officer, with the idea that, during the revolution, you had all these people like Washington, Jefferson, Franklin. If we could train 14 or 15 Americans that are 30 to 35, then maybe one day they'll come back to government. So he wrote me a letter of recommendation, and so did a 4-star general in the Army. And I ended up becoming the youngest White House Fellow in the history of the program. I wrote a book about that experience as well, but I ended up working in 88, 89, which is a transition year. So I had both Reagan and Bush. And I wanted to work for Bill Bennett because I love, my mother was a school teacher. Education was really important to me. So I did get hired to work for Bill Bennett, but then he left education in the summer to start a nonprofit with Gene Kirkpatrick and Jack Kemp, Empower America. So I didn't want to work at education without him. So I ended up working for John Whitehead. There was already someone working for Schultz at State, but the deputy wanted a White House Fellow, and I got permission to work directly for him. And that's where my interest in finance started. But then during the Bush administration, he hires Bill Bennett to be the nation's first drug czar. So next thing you know, Bennett, who had already hired me at education, I became his third hire working in the White House. And that kind of started this thing where I've had an opportunity to work for 6 presidents of both parties. And when you're in the Situation Room, and, I'm hard on the president because I think he should have gone after Krog Island back in April, but I wasn't there. And, there'll be 10 or 12 people there that'll speak up. It could be a military commander. It could be the head of the CIA and say, look, we have information or intelligence from the Mossad, blah, blah, blah. And therefore, if you do it, we're going to lose hundreds of good servicemen, blah, blah, blah. And then so they argue about it. And at the end of the day, the president makes the call and that's it. But not being in the room, I don't know what the intel is. I don't know what he's being told. So, I always give him, the benefit of the doubt. But it was interesting. This Sunday at 3:00 in Truth Social, Trump posted an image of Krog, like he's going to attack Krog now. But as you know, I had this whole theory of a dimmer switch because I lived in the Republic of Panama that had the canal for 99 years, Guantanamo, another lease for, I don't know, 97 year. And anyway, it didn't happen. They went with the blockade, which I thought was a mistake. And of course, they just don't understand the mentality of the Iranian army. I mean, they will never surrender because they're all about power. They're not going to give up their power. And there's just no way that a land war is going to succeed. And we are wasting away all our missiles. And the Chinese, who have all the rare earth elements, there's a big date coming up, which is the 10th of November. And, you know, there's a price of rare earth elements right now where it's like $8 in China and it's $1,400 in Europe because manufacturers can't get it. And it's just so funny because the first book that you mentioned, a lot of these books are about supply chains, you know, and how supply chains and connectivity would bring us closer. Well, that second book that you talked about was 2016, but now that we're in this like war mode with China, now supply chains have become weaponized, and you can't just all of a sudden produce rare earth elements, and you want to create a mine somewhere or a data center. All of a sudden, politics show up, and you're never going to get a data center or rare earths quick enough. You know, it's like, you know, Greenland has a ton of rare earths, but it'll take 10 years to actually mine them and refine them.
You have to refine them. And I think, you know, I love the piece. I don't remember the title of it right now, but it was just within the last week. And I want you to break it down because you talked about the 20 things. Like you did a scorecard, basically. Like, here's the 20 things that have happened, whether you realize they happened, whether you understood what they meant when they happened. Here's the 20 things. And I'm going to tell you the honest thing from your perspective and also kind of the non-honest thing or like the hype thing, right? And you laid that out on kind of what the administration has achieved or decided to do based on these kind of 20 things. And it was very insightful. I don't have one that I want to pick on more than the other. I think it was the kind of work where whether you're a fan or not a fan, it's not the point. If you're an American and if you're an investor, you kind of need to know what these things are, and you have to form your own opinion about them without the spin of an agenda other than trying to find truth. Like, what does this look like 5 years, 10 years, 20 years out? And what does it mean for my money?
People don't want to do the work. They want to be, you know, spoon-fed. And you know, the real article was about, you know, if you look at the last 20 midterms in the United States,
right,
18 of the 20 were lost by an average of 25 seats by the incumbent. And, you know, to win a midterm is nearly impossible in the House, right? So I wrote an article like, okay, what are the 20 biggest accomplishments that the base would look at and say, yeah, I'm going to get off my sofa and go to the gymnasium and vote on a rainy day in Alabama or wherever. And would it be enough to do it? And I had, you know, written a piece similar to this in February of 2012. And I said, you know, that Obama was going to win the election because of the Latino vote. We're going to really come out for him. And that's exactly what happened. So I'm like, well, what's going to happen between now and November? And so I made that analysis, and you know, and I came out, and then yesterday I published something, or a couple of days ago, that if you go back like 30 years and you look at what happened at this time in the markets, like in the last like 90 days before the election, and it averages to like a zero, doesn't mean that things don't go up and go down, but you know, it would kind of be the same because people are trying to figure out what's going to happen. And then traditionally it has gone up after all of that stuff gets resolved. And I think we're going to have a divided Congress. And I don't see any way around it. I do think that the Republicans will keep the Senate but lose the House, and that, of course, is going to have implications. But it won't be a huge majority, as you know happened in the past. It won't be like a huge mandate, but it's going to complicate a lot of things for the administration, obviously.
Yeah, and the interesting thing for me, like again, leaning through my own fatigue of it, my own bias of it, trying to not get sucked into things I can't control and only worry about the things I can, everything in between. You know, some of the things that jumped out at me is like, okay, suppressing votes is as important as rallying a vote, right? If not more important. When you say stay on the couch, the midterms have always been historically, using your deep dive data, because you did a bunch of proprietary kind of looks at a lot of different maps. You ran thousands of scenarios through whatever machinery you put together with whatever rule set. So it wasn't like you just borrowed a couple of people's data points. You literally did the work. He documents it all in the writing. If you haven't seen it, it was this week. And my takeaway from that was, okay, so what is the thing that's going to get me out this year if I'm on a base of either side, right? I think both sides have kind of gotten to the tone deaf part of their argument, where like people are just kind of like, okay, I don't hear
a lot is local too, right? So you could have a local stuff going on and corruption, and people are upset, and you have a candidate that's very well liked. But you know, Trump's on the road. He was wasn't he in Michigan yesterday? So he's now on the road supporting these candidates, particularly in places where clearly he needs to go out and help those politicians.
Yeah, and the thing that I wonder about, like with the base, when you think about, call it the independent that was tired of the crazy direction we were headed, or the hardcore, call it Republican ride or die, you know, that basically created the mandate, call it, that got this administration back in. When you think about that, I feel like there's been a lot of wind out of the sails, but there's also still a lot of progress. Like when you read those 20 things, you could be like, hey, yeah, let's keep this going, because these are 20 important things. And these, I don't care who gets credit for them, these are important things. And if you take away your TDS or whatever it is, or just your apathy, you can go, well, these 20 things matter. Okay, so that's good. Let's keep that going. But I also look at the things like what happened in LA with the mayor's race. And you know, I live in California, right? So I live like a couple hours north of LA, and you watch that happen and what happened to Spencer Pratt, and you go, I was not a fan of Spencer Pratt, but I sure as hell was a fan of his campaign. And then to watch that happen, you just kind of go, man, what the hell? Like, you know, yesterday, I didn't see the whole thing, but something came out about Becerra that he may end up having to resign about, right? And I'm going, great, good for Steve Hilton. But you go, well, it's too early. Like, you don't want to peak this early. It's freaking, right? Yeah. Like, you need that to happen like 2 days before the election.
So what do you, Becerra is on my, I could text him, because back when I was the chairman of the Board of Visitors of the Academy, he when he was in Congress, helped me out with getting more of his constituents to apply and go to the Air Force Academy. But yeah, he's had quite an interesting career. Always very nice to me, because I've known him going back 20 years. But I don't pay that much attention to those races. But
I think as it relates to midterms, the statewide stuff, like your point was the maps, the cartography matters more than even the philosophy or the sentiment. That was the take that I got, right? And these maps have been, redrawn for the better part of a decade. And even inside of that, so even inside of the map advantage, you still said the House goes. And again, we don't need to get into like the full piece, because people should read it and make their own decision. But that deals with both quant and qualitative analysis. And so I'm more interested in when you assess the level of quantitative data that you do, whether you're writing about, what's going to happen next in Iran, or before it happens, what's going to happen to Taiwan. there's a rigor and there's a respect for data and receipts that I think is part of your style. And yet there's still this qualitative human side that balances out what I'm going to do with my money. And why.
Yeah. So I've always done this. I ran a couple of hedge funds. So the more data, the better, but it's also language. So I am monitoring all news, all financial news, all economic and all military news in 22 languages. And then I look at who is writing about this. And is there any tradable idea here that I could make money based on the fact that no one's covering this? And then I look at what's happening in the next 7 days, because you want to try to find a hook. And, Market Watch, sister organization, to the Wall Street Journal and Barron's, if I'm writing something, the editor's going to be more excited if there's a hook happening next week.
Right.
So sometimes I was like, oh man, this would be a great thing to write about, but I'm going to do it in 3 weeks, because in 3 weeks, all this stuff is happening, and that would be the perfect time to surface it. And in Market Watch, are always like, okay, how does that affect our readers' 401k? Why should they care? I like Substack because I can write geopolitics and not tie it to the market specifically. But I look at all this information, and then I synthesize it down to, what's important in the next 7 days, and what are things that are really interesting that the United States is saying on the one hand, but it's being reported in the Chinese press in Chinese totally opposite. So somebody's lying, right? Who's actually lying? So I'll be able to do more.
Or how much, or maybe more question, after knowing that everybody lies, what relative basis are they lying about, right? Because if they're both lying, who's lying in a disproportionately relative basis to the other?
I learned this when I worked in the State Department. Here I am. I was invited to meetings with George Shultz or John Whitehead. He's sitting with the president of a country and 4 or 5 people in the room. And the strangest thing on my first meeting is I came with a notebook to take notes, and it's like, no notes are allowed. I'm like, what? That makes no sense. And they said, no, it makes total sense, because that way everybody can leave the room and report what they want to report. Mm-hmm. 2 people hear the exact same thing, but they say it's not what you say, it's what you hear. So you're the assistant to the president of that foreign country, and you leave and you report it a certain way back to your embassy, your political people, who then get it out as to this is what happened at the meeting, while the US side could be reporting something totally different. And it's the strangest way to do things, but that's the way that it actually works.
So I wanted to get your thoughts on this and tear it apart at whatever level, because I'm happy with it, but I also know nothing is complete. I think in the last post I did, out of the 10,000 words in part 1 or whatever it was thereabouts, I think about 3,000 I'm in with a question, right? And I say that because that's what I'm trying to do for both my free and my paid writer audience is just bring them more into the conversation, because I'm watching your audience engage with you in a way that I go, yeah, I need some of that in my life, right? And I want to be that for whoever's following, subscribing to me. So I have these 3 lenses, one reality thing, right? And it kind of pairs with your everyone lies and here's what they lie about thing. but not like by purpose. It
Right.
just kind of does. So if I think about like what Wall Street sees, I said they see Nvidia, they see earnings, they see the Alphabet drop after $99 billion in profit reported, but a capex negative, or cash flow negative expense for the first time in 2 decades. They see multiples. That's Wall Street. Then Washington goes, yeah, energy, semiconductors, national labs, Genesis mission, talent, manufacturing coming back onshore, chips onshore, leadership, scientific leadership, right? And then there's everybody else, right? Which is all of us who live in this world and somebody wants us to vote for them or give us their money. And that's the electricians or the welders. Do they have jobs? Machine shops. What's the premium being paid? That's the gas prices at my pump yesterday, $6.59. And that's all this cognitive dissonance that's happening while I'm being told. And I don't want to say gaslit, because I'm really focused now on trying to help my audience understand the financial economy and the real economy exist at the same time.
Right.
They used to be one thing. They used to be one thing because we hadn't financially engineered everything. But over the last 3 decades, especially, we have these 2 disparate things. We have the financial economy, we call that the economy, but then we have the real economy, and that's what we pander to for votes.
Yep.
And I just want to understand where there's gaps in that, where, whatever, because I know you and I talked a little bit about what I've been reading of yours, what you've been reading of mine. I just kind of wanted to understand, pick it apart, or like, tell me what jumped out at you, or what you agreed with, or what you didn't agree with, what's too thin.
I if people haven't read your piece from Friday, it is, very, very good. What was the title of it, so people know?
Basically, understanding AI before Wall Street does. Yeah, it's the 3-part Wealth Matters Intelligence Report Series 101, but the first title was understanding AI, the AI trade before Wall Street does, something of that nature. I don't have it in front of me. And then the second one was was related to the Genesis mission and kind of tying all those dots together. The first one's really about the quiet architect, which formulaically I've started to think about the people behind it more, because I've been reading some of your stuff, and I love how you always focus on the people. So Mike Kratsios has been famous this week because of what happened with Moonshot over about 7 days ago, right? When Kimmy K3 dropped, and then all of a sudden, right around that time, a 123-page report that Donald Trump commissioned a while back for Kratsios to write. Kratsios drops it, and then literally drops the report right around the same time as Kimmy K3 comes out, and then spends the next 2 days going from obscurity to basically all things CNN and whatever, talking about, we're going to ban open weight models. It's a national security threat, right? And then you have everybody from Sachs to, all the big names, right? The all-in guys, to even Jensen Huang came out and said, essentially this is a mistake. Like Jensen Huang, I think, posted his first time ever on X a day or 2 ago with like a cigarette saying something like, don't ban open weight models, right? So now you have the CEO of NVIDIA basically saying to the administration, and then meanwhile, you have this real design behind it. So I read the 123-page government piece of report. I digested it. I used my tools to analyze it. And then I wrote this report on what I think it means and the questions we should be asking, and how does someone navigate it in the near term and long term. And, that's what this piece was about. But
what I liked about it is that you started with the human side. You started with Roosevelt. So, President Roosevelt. And the guy that wrote
Roosevelt, Trump, you don't think same party, right?
Yeah. And it's like Vannevar, which is a weird name, Bush.
I know.
An engineer that almost nobody knew. And Bush answered with a blueprint that lasted the next basically 80 years of American science. And now Trump has Michael Kratsios, another man most Americans couldn't identify in a lineup. And he's writing what the White House called the first overhaul of that blueprint since Bush, right?
Well, and what pairs with it is, in parallel, without me realizing it, you were writing this stuff about the 20 things, you were writing things about the electoral map, you're writing all this stuff. And at the same time, you're talking about how things that have not been dealt with, decided upon, I think is how you said it. These decisions have been pushed down, right? So back to Rebecca Costa, what happens? Inherited problems. These inherited problems that just get pushed from administration to administration. Blame the last guy for whatever isn't working. Promise the thing that you're not going to do anything about to the voter, right, and then blame it again, right? Take credit for the thing that did work, even if it wasn't yours. That's inherited problems, right? So you're writing about this, and at the same time, I'm going, okay, Kratsios was, I think he was the first ever CTO for the United States of America in 45th administration. He was the first one to ever hold that title. Things that came out of that were the quantum blueprint, right? And some of these other things. So then I meet some of these other guys in 2020 randomly, not randomly, but literally the story is I was at CES in an elevator. I was doing a gig for Sony. I had nothing to do the first day. I was tired. I went down to the lobby to see where the coffee was in the VIP room. In the elevator, I meet a guy named Kyle Wiley. I can't keep my mouth shut. So I'm like, hey, Kyle, I'm like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, oh, my name's Kyle. I'm like, hi, I'm Chris. What do you do? He ends up being a senior advisor at DOE Labs. So we strike up a conversation. That turns into 3 weeks later. I was in DC speaking on crypto and blockchain regulation at Congress for this event. And I said, hey, you want to grab coffee and reconnect and pick up our conversation at CES? He's like, yeah, I want you to meet my friend who runs opportunity zones for Trump. But we have to go to his office. I'm like, great, where is it? Is there a coffee shop nearby? He goes, well, it's at EOB. And I'm like, what the hell's EOB? I don't even know. Next thing, right? So next thing you know, he's like, well, you have this and that. And I'm like, I'm going in through the White House, right? And I'm like, oh my God, Mom, Dad, I'm going to the White House. Like, and so my one and only time in the White House, you've been there a lot more than I have, was for a meeting that lasted 35 minutes with the senior advisor around opportunity zone regulations. And I was pitching him this idea of putting Bitcoin mining operations in the same tax treatment for opportunity zones, because I knew guys at Core Scientific who had 350 megawatts. And I'm like, what if you used P&L CapEx to offset the income, but then you held the inventory on the balance sheet and then 10 years from now sold it tax-free? And so I'm pitching that, and they're like, well, we're looking for executive orders that really matter. 2 weeks later, they did the lockdowns. So that was literally like, it was just put away. So then all this comes back last week.
Yeah. When I was reading it over the weekend, what got my attention, I was thinking more 1985, my friend Charles Krauthammer named the Reagan Doctrine. And I always liked reading Krauthammer. He was a medical doctor. He got paralyzed. He was in a wheelchair. He won the Pulitzer Prize writing opinion editorials. And I tried to mimic what he did. And I wrote a piece earlier this year called The Trump Doctrine.
Yep.
And I think that's what kind of you were trying to do with your analysis. And I don't, and I think you did a great job. And I think people should read it. And I think that you found the central fact, which is that AI doesn't live in a cloud. A cloud is actually a warehouse that sits on land. It drinks water, it eats electricity, and somebody still has to build the damn thing.
And secure it. And secure it.
Yeah. And the machine thinks fast, but the world builds slow. And that's the story. We do not have an idea shortage. America has plenty of people who can announce the future, but we're running short on people who can build it by Tuesday, and the enemy isn't China. China's real, China's capable, China's patient, but the deeper enemy is time, and it's ourselves. 5 years to build a freaking power connection, years for a permit, years to build a factory, a generation to replace a machinist, because the knowledge is in the machinist's hands.
Tacit
and
talking about tacit,
you can't download a machinist. You can barely teach it. So, we've spent 40 years teaching those hands to go code. All right. Meanwhile, the machine gets smarter every month. The grid doesn't, and that's the gap. That's where the fight is. And I think that's also where the money is, because Wall Street's going to screw this up the way Wall Street always screws everything up. Okay. It will find every company remotely connected to AI and bid it to the moon.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean it's going to be profitable. Air is essential. And there's companies out there that are small, but without them, they're a choke point to the building of AI. And then you have energy itself. If you look at the energy sector, oil companies and things like that used to be 16, 17% of the S&P 500. And then it became like 3%, 4%, because everybody hated those companies and they basically got sold. But 23, 24% of Warren Buffett's book is energy companies, and
well, that was something that you said. That's something that you said that I thought was, again, just part of that thorough analysis / responsibility, which was, and I'm paraphrasing. Can't remember if it was in the paid version or the free, I don't remember, chapter. But you said energy's already happened. In other words, like, we're talking about energy. So what's happening now is we keep hearing these themes. You just said it again. And so what a normal person or even a smart investor might be doing is like, great, I'm going to go find whatever ticker, whatever energy thing, Charlie or whomever recommends, I'm going to go buy it. But the reality is that's already up 35% for the year, meaning that dog's already run. So it's not that a bad trade. It's just that that arbitrage, money.
Yeah, to speak, you could look at it as a trade, or like Buffett doesn't care if something's up or down.
Right.
And I do something called rebalancing. So I have a friend that owns four stocks, and his return has been 19% for 14 years. And one of the stocks is Berkshire, and the others are ETFs. S&P 500 is one of them. But so what he does mid-year, let's say June 30th, if Berkshire is up 30% that year, others are down, he takes all four back to 25% equal. And then he rebalances it the next time. So he's rebalancing once a year. And the reason that you do that is because now you're buying stuff that's gone down at a lower price that's probably going to come back, and you bought it cheaper. If you didn't rebalance, his return would have been about 10, 11%. But by rebalancing, it's 19%.
So it's a way of dollar cost averaging, basically, without having to change your, if your thesis hasn't changed.
Yeah, and he has four. I have a friend that has 95% of his wealth. It used to be in 12 stocks, and he met with Charlie Munger, and he said, after talking to Charlie when he was alive, I think I have too many stocks. I should cut it to 10. Now he owns 9. And I've always been impressed with having 95% of your wealth in 9 companies. He's a value investor. 2 of his stocks are 2 of my biggest holdings also. But this other guy has only 4. And that goes to show you that most investors overcomplicate things. Here's a guy that owns Berkshire and 3 ETFs, and the ETFs have virtually no fees, minimal, right? And he's making 19%, which means he's doubling his money every like 3.5 years, right? So if he has $1 million in 3.5 years, it's going to be 2, then it's going to become 4, 8. And I'm trying to teach people that theory of simplicity and compounding, and not having to own, 100 different companies. Find a great company, have a great thesis, put your money in, and just let your profits ride. And if those companies are buying back their stock, paying off the debt, then your dividends, and if you're reinvesting the dividends, you're also every quarter you're buying stock, whether it's up or down, and you're doing that as well. So over a period of time, instead of buying a stock to go up, I like to think more of cash flow. So I had a goal many years ago to say, look, in the money that I have in the stock market, I wanted to generate a minimum of $3 million a year at a dividend rate, which is like 23.8% in taxes, which is pretty low. And if it's generating $3 million a year, but it's also growing 20% a year, it's doubling every 3.5 years. So you have to have a lot of discipline to find companies that have those dividends and you got to switch in and out of them a lot sooner. But there are companies that over a period of 4 or 5 years will compound their dividend at 40% a year. So if you think more about buying for this equity to go up versus the cash that's being distributed from these companies, whatever you're investing in, and then what is the tax implication of it? So I look at that. I put some of my cash in one of MicroStrategy's perpetual stocks, where you're getting a nice dividend above 10%, and it's not treated as it's treated as a return of capital. And I've talked about it, but of course I'm a believer in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is one of my largest assets, only because I got in 2014 and I never sold, and I bought more as it goes up. And I believe that in 20 years it will be worth between 10 and 20 million dollars a coin. And if you just hold it and sit on it and don't sell with all these ups and downs. So yeah, oil has had a run this year, but that doesn't mean I would sell it, because it's something that I want to hold for a long time, a long period of time.
So I think you're eliminating a contradiction / human reality that I think all of us struggle with. And as someone who has any level of maybe potential reach or impact, and I think about a lot, which is back to Costa, right? We invent complexity and we outpace our ability to solve our own problems. And in our portfolios, we do the same thing. We buy too many stocks. We consider too many ideas, but it's dopamine, right? Just like social media gave us these addiction levels at higher velocity amongst a broader set of humanity. Well, why? Because now we had that sugar high, the endless scroll, we had the addictive things in everyone's hands. So of course we saw an impact. Well, similarly, democratizing access to financial data, to geopolitical analysis, to brilliant work like what you do, the conversations that I get to have with people like you that illuminate all this stuff out of the ivory towers and down to anyone who can tune in for free. And the Atomic Level will always be free, just like your Saturdays will always be free, because these conversations should not be walled off. The inherent challenge is you're going to get dopamine highs off of chasing down these rabbit holes. And then what you're going to find out is smart people who actually have money, people who've lost money and made it back and lost it again and made the same mistake more than once, go, oh my God, simple is better. Like, let me just pick a thesis that makes sense to me.
Absolutely. But, and the other thing that you can do is pick thematic, right? So you can pick like 5 or 6 themes or buckets, and then say, okay, who do I want to have in that bucket? And you can then pick the companies and then decide what percentage, if you're saying this bucket's going to be 10% of my, what's in the market, what are you going to allocate to each one? And you got to make those choices as well, which is really important. But you're either a simplifier or you're a complicator. And one of the things I loved about Steve Jobs is that he always tried to simplify things. Even on his deathbed, he's in the hospital redesigning the hospital room because, and it's a true story, and he would look at the box that you would get your iPhone in and like, what can we take out? What can we simplify? When he would give his yearly talk, he would measure how many words would he have in each slide. And every year he would try to have less words and more pictures. Pictures tell 1,000 words. Pick the right picture. You see these PowerPoint slides with 100, 200 words, like so complicated. And he would always do that. So, and I think investing, it's counterintuitive. It's like Charlie Munger would say, sitting on your hands is the best thing. And he and Buffett would spend 4 hours a day just thinking. Just
reading, thinking, right?
Reading, thinking. They would talk, and they would make. Look, he convinced Buffett to go into like an EV car company in China back in like 08, 09, and that investment made him like 25x, and they really didn't get out till like 2022, 23. You look at Coca-Cola, he's been in for 38, 39 years now. And his initial investment in Coca-Cola was about $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion. And last year he made like 800 million on the dividend.
Yeah.
800 million in dividend. Now the stock has also gone up, but in another 3 or 4 years, the dividend is going to surpass what he actually invested.
What his initial principle was. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's more the mind that you got to get your head around.
Yeah. And I think the other thing I can say from my own pain and, lessons is that embrace both, right? Embrace the simplicity, but embrace the humanity of us that is curious, that is ever seeking knowledge. Like if I do anything right about this most recent report I'm trying to write, is I want people to understand the infrastructure beneath whatever you want to call it, America's golden age, making it great again, building back it better. I don't care whose verbiage you like. Point is if you live here, you want it to be better, regardless of your political feeling. So what is the infrastructure that's going to make that a true story or just a narrative that doesn't hold any weight? And if what somebody takes away from listening to 1 minute of it or reading all 20,000 words of it, I hope if I've done is they've gone, okay, here's the case. So if I'm thematic about, is America going to have a future in this world of AI and everything else? Okay, great. What is that future? And can I bet on it? And do I feel good about it? And do I feel certain in it? Some level of certainty for me and my family. Similarly, do I understand what China's win is going to be? Because then you can make sense of it just through two simple themes. China has supply chains. They don't invent anything. They have to tell, so they can do certain things. They can wait for us to invent, and then they can knock off. Okay, Kimmy K3, Kimmy K5, Kimmy K10, doesn't matter. That's what they're going to do. Why? They'll give away that thing for free because they refine the materials that makes the stuff that thing eats. But we are now organizing where we have the ability to make some of that stuff, but it's going to take 10, 15 years. What they can't knock off is the innovation throughput mechanism. So if you're trying to figure out where do they stand, well, both countries probably look pretty powerful still 10, 20 years out. There will be conflicts. Both are dependent on each other. But if you live in one, you don't need to move to the other to win. You just have to.
You're right. They're very interdependent. And if you look at all the routes for oil that China needs, it comes through sea lanes, which we control. And 20% comes out of Hormuz, and there's another 10% that actually is coming out of Guyana that I wrote an article out, and we have this new Monroe Doctrine. And the Chinese shouldn't be owning all this oil that's coming out of Guyana because they bought this company in Canada, but they also need soybeans and they need food, and but then we need things from them too. The problem with the Chinese is they think in decades and in 100 years. They don't think in quarters or election cycles. But there's a lot of real politics, and they have their own internal politics that they have to deal with. But we need to be able to sit down. It'll be interesting if Xi actually comes to the U.S. As planned. But how we get these rare earth elements that we're going to need to resupply the Tomahawks, the airplanes, the drones, and everything else will be fascinating to watch. But I think there's still great investment opportunities, picking the right companies that are going to thrive no matter who wins geopolitically. And, the AI genie is out of the bottle. Not
Right.
Everybody is talking about regulating them, but how do you regulate intelligence? I think it's just not a.
How do you stop code, doable. Right? It's like everybody who says you're going to kill Bitcoin. It's the same thing. It's like you don't have to buy any, you don't have to believe in it, but you can't stop it. So,
and I know you're a Bitcoin guy, and I always tell I have very smart friends that have hundreds of millions of dollars. I said, dude, just do what I did. I had a very good friend in YPO in 2014. He said, hey, could you lose 1% of your net worth? Would you lose sleep over it? I said, I wouldn't like it, but yeah, it's okay. And he said, well, do me a favor. Go buy this thing. And
Right.
and so I tried to buy it, but then it said, oh, you're an American, so you can't buy this. So I said, too complicated. But then he called me 3 months later and said, hey, did you buy it? I said, no, I tried.
This
so
was
I
2014. Yeah, this was, you were on Mount Gox or something, probably.
Yeah, so I finally figured it out. And, I am a Panamanian citizen too. I have a Panamanian passport and could invest from other places. And that over a period of time turned into one of the largest assets now. And now I tell my friends, dude, just buy 1%, buy 0.5%, and put it in a trust for your grandchildren. Right. And if you're wrong or you're right that it's nonsense, then you lost 0.5% or 1%. But if I'm right and it's going to be 10 to 20 million, then your grandkids are going to wake up 20 years from now with 20 million in their trust, But some of them have done it, and a lot of them there's just a disconnect,
Yeah, well, and I think, sometimes the pain of it is that when you don't need it, you don't see it, right? So let's say you have $100 million, $50 million, like you technically don't need it, right? Like you can't spend $50 million in principal.
No.
I heard something the other day. It was like, you have to spend, I forget what it was, $137,000 a day or whatever in consumption.
You're probably right. And I'm sure that's part of it. But before, let's say 5 years ago, 6 years ago, you would need to put 100 or 200 hours of diligence in your time to understand Bitcoin. Today, with 10 hours of listening to some unbelievable podcast or reading 1 or 2 books, you can figure it out. So, I get it now. It's a lot.
The biggest people don't get their head around is they can't get their head around the productization of it, meaning price action, and actual utility, because I don't understand what it does. And I think the short version of what does it do, whether you believe in it or not, and like you said, 5%, 1%, like, are you going to miss it? No. What if it returns your whole portfolio in 20 years? Are you going to care? Yeah, I'm going to care then. Well, you're not going to care if you lose it, and you're going to care a lot if you didn't have it. And you can do this once and put it into trust, put it in cold storage, leave it in Wyoming. You're good. Have multi-sig. We'll help you out with all that. Let's say you get to that. It's like, well, what does it do? Well, just think of it as like permanent beachfront property that's completely permissionless and portable for your next 2 generations.
Right. But you can go to places in Portugal, you can go to Argentina, you can go to Salvador, you have it on your phone and you use it to pay your Uber, buy McDonald's. I mean,
that's the thing is when you spent time in Nicaragua, you lived down there. You see, like when I traveled in 2018, I lived in Thailand for a summer. We went all over the world. And like when you're on a dollar hegemonic system, when you see it there, you go, well, we don't need it, right? Because our money's good everywhere. But like when you live somewhere where your money's not good outside those borders, then you understand why people want some of it, right? And why they use it. And then
I have to embarrass my daughter. I just noticed that.
By the way, that was an awesome song she sang the other day on your feed. I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. That's Paloma, but my 28-year-old Amparo, who lives in the Boulder area, she has a Substack called Lens Her Story. And she just wrote an unbelievable piece called Every Knot Has Two Weavers. And you can find her at Lens Her Story on Substack.
I like that name.
She is an amazing writer. I'm really proud of her. I have 3 daughters, and 1 son. And it's great having
They're all in their 20s, 30s now? How old are they?
Amparo's 28, Paloma is 23, Sterling's 30, and my daughter Olivia is 32, and she works for Accenture, but she's actually working for OpenAI right now because they're an Accenture client. So she's training people in the US government how to use ChatGPT use cases and stuff like that.
Very
So one of my kids is married, 3 grandkids, and then the others all have serious relationships, but no marriage yet.
Where did is it Paloma the singer? Where did she get the voice?
Paloma is the singer. She went to NYU, and she's the only kid that knew what she wanted. When she was 8 years old, she wanted to be an actor. She sings, writes music, she acts. She's always been in plays. She went 9, 10, 11, and 12 to a boarding school in Boston that prepared kids to be in theater. And then she went into NYU, did really well there, and now she's a struggling actress. She works as a waitress, and when she's not waitressing, she's auditioning. And then Amparo wanted to be a engineer, robotics and all that stuff. Ended up going to Columbia, didn't really like it, and then she ended up going to one of the top psychology schools in the country called Naropa, very experiential. I took her there, I was super impressed. It was founded by Buddhist monks in like 1973 in Boulder. So she went there and completed her degree and is an incredible filmmaker, writer, super creative, unbelievable photographer. And I'm proud of all my kids. Love them dearly.
I think what's so interesting is like timing. Like I'm bullish on. I know Elon just came out the other day and he gave his timeliner humanity and a 20% chance and all that stuff. And I'm like, well, you know what? If SpaceX had a 10% chance, I like those odds. 80% is pretty good for humanity. The point is like humans always will want one thing, which is to be around other humans. That doesn't mean we won't have 100 agents and nanobots working through our life every day. It just means that we will do this with each other because we're human. Just like dogs like to play at the beach with other dogs. Sure, if the owner throws the ball, they like it, but they're really happy running around, getting wet and splashing with other dogs. And so whoever the overlord is, humans will crave those experiences that only humans understand at the human level. And I wonder what happens to, everybody's like, oh, AI is going to replace music. It's going to replace this. It's replacing film. It's like, okay, yeah, but it's also going to put the premium back to that framework, right? Trust, context, taste, and coordination on someone who's truly talented, who's a struggling artist, who all of a sudden then becomes a multi-gazillionaire, not because it was their goal, but simply because they deliver something that no other person can. We're not going to go spend millions of dollars to go watch robots play football. We're going to watch humans play football.
You know what I always think about is, there's a dozen DJs in the world.
Yeah.
That are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're spinning records.
Right. Other people's music.
Other people's music, but they're making new music based on coordination. And I think
they're orchestrating, they're conducting an experience. And that's the point of coordination.
So AI is like a third mind to some people, where you have these creative people who are using AI for research and other things, and then they're putting it together with their own mind and creativity. And it's like having digital employees. Like if you were running, Paul Degoe, who is a White House fellow, has been 30 years as the head of the op-ed pages, right? And he has all these full-time writers, and he'll think of stuff, go do research, go find this. And they come back and they brainstorm, and then he tells them, go write this, and they write it. And he's orchestrating that whole crew of people. And I think that's what you're talking about in orchestration. One of the things I'd love to get your opinion on, I'm actually going to go to Miami, take the train down there today for a few days, because I have an R360 young couple, built a company, had a $400 million exit. And they're thinking like, how did Buffett make his wealth, right? He bought, in many cases, private companies and just held them for a very long time, or then invested in public companies, but like Geico and things like that. And their idea, which sounds kind of interesting to me, is, and they're already done one, is they go out and they put 10 million down for all the legal, and they use their background and their brand with what they've already built and say, hey, we're going to raise a $250 million SPAC. All right. And then once we have the 250 million, we have 2 years to invest it. We're going to do it in less than a year, but we're going to find an AI company, an operating business that already has revenues and profits and $1 billion valuation. And instead of most SPACs, which are, a ripoff, they're going to come in with long-term capital and say, look, we're going to create this vehicle to go public. We're bringing these amazing board members to help you grow. And we don't ever want to sell. We want you to take this $1 billion company and make it into a $10 or $20 billion company. And what they want to do is prove the model. So they do it with one company, then they do it another. Now they have success. And then maybe the third, instead of raising 250, they raise 500. And they're looking for a $2 billion valuation, but they're retaining 25 or 30% of the company. So they called me and they say, hey, the trick here is finding the company, right? And they're agnostic as to industry. It could be defense, it could be AI, it could be a boring company. So they want me to come onto the board. And, I've been on a public company before. At the age of 44, I was on the board of Winn-Dixie that came out of bankruptcy. And I'm going to go spend a few days kind of really looking at this and deciding whether in the next couple of months, I want to be on the board of a public SPAC, now being a public company officer or director, I'd be a director. It's like a microscope where they look at everything. But with all of the Substack followers, I got like 6,000 or 7,000 followers. They're not subscribers, they just follow. And then another, 23,000 subscribers. So you're talking about 30,000 people. And if I said, hey, I'm really looking for a company with $1 billion enterprise value that looks like this, and I'm not the one that has to analyze it. I just have to find it, look at it, and if I think it's interesting enough, I make the introduction to the team to diligence it to see if it is what the prospects are. But what do you think about that?
I mean, I think a lot of things. I think you got $5 trillion a year for the next 22 years transferring from one hand to the next with boomers.
Yeah, that's true.
That's Cerulli research. I wrote about
it. From men to women, 90% of the wealth is in the hand of men who are going to die soon, and it's going to go to their spouse.
So I wrote a piece about it called the $124 trillion transfer, but no one's talking about the leaks. And the leaks are going to be where it doesn't go clean because someone's plan isn't intact, the legacy, the estate, the asset protection, predators come, documents aren't up to date, it's not whatever, right? There's all these things, right? So I wrote about it more through the lens of how do you protect whatever your version of that is from leaking so that whoever you intended to go to, it arrives to as intended without creating more flack or administration to the Gen X person or the wife that now has to administer it from a place of grief. Okay, so there's that. So you're playing into a 20-year run where, regardless of what it's priced at, $5 trillion worth of stuff is changing hands. There's not enough buyers for that. There's not enough.
And a lot of what you're talking about is older individuals that own private companies that have $1 billion enterprise value that they're going to die and their spouse and their kids want to monetize it because they don't want to run the company.
22% of the small businesses that are between 10 to 100 million a year in revenue, I think it's 22%. Can't remember exactly. It's somewhere right around there, are owned by people age 65 and over. 52 point something% of the people I looked at that own a business between 10 to 100 million a year in ARR these are small businesses, 10 to 100 million a year revenue, right? So if you put any kind of multiplier on that, you're talking about 100 to 250. So if you go up to $1 billion a year in revenue or a $400 million business that's trading at a a 10 times EBITDA, let's say,
right,
that's $1 billion revenue. You're going to still be in somewhere in this range. The point is 50 some odd % of those businesses that are in that lower middle market are owned by people older than you and me.
Yeah. So I think you struck on something I wasn't thinking about. And I think you're right, because I was thinking more of these younger entrepreneurs with kind of AI companies, but all of those are venture back. You got PE. Those are
I would play the contrarian. I would say that is the least play. That'd be the last place.
I agree with you. I think what you're saying makes more sense.
I would buy. I was talking about you at the green room, but one example, I'd go into the tier 2 defense space, and we've already been doing this.
I love defense. It has to be in one of those tiers that I
go into the
tiers.
Yeah, there's a theme. So there's America's national missions, right? I printed this off so I wouldn't have to read it. This was in the post, but if you just go, okay, so build the world's scientific operating system, secure computational sovereignty, solve the energy constraint, rebuild manufacturing. If I went after just the theme of American manufacturing, I go out and I find a 20 to 100 million, $200 million a year business that's in a manufacturing vertical. Let's take OEMs for tier 2 defense, because guess what? You can go to sam.gov. We've already built AIs on our side, but you could do it. And you could basically scan everybody who just got a contract for Raytheon and then who their subs are. So now you look at who are the tier 2 subs that get fed a deal, 10 million at a time, 30 million at a time. Every time we build a new missile, every time an F-35 needs to go off the boat, right? One of the companies that I'm talking about makes a chip cost $46,000, one chip, right? And they sell lots of them. And they're all tier 2 manufacturers. So they have regulated environments. They have this stuff. They have a process. They have a supply chain. And you could argue for defense spending being a big spend for the next 20 years, owned by someone in their 60s and someone in their 70s, cash flowing for 35 years, reputation, rock solid, right? So trust, back to the framework, trust. Can you trust it? Well, it's been around for 35 years and it's got long-term contracts with the biggest players in the world. And it's got 30% growth. Yeah, I think I can trust it. What does the 60-year-old, 70-year-old person in that scenario want? They want what everybody wants. They don't want to retire today, but they want a personal balance sheet. Because right now, anyone who understands those businesses realizes if you got a rich partner, like if you and I, you're richer than me, I know that. You and I start a business. I'm going to be the guy on the PG. So we could both win. Right. We could both make money. But you're not going to personally guarantee anything. But Chris is going to have to, because we're going to go get a bank loan. We're going to go get this. So my house, my assets, even though I have a profitable company, my ass is on the line. So even though I'm making 10, 20 million a year off this thing, I'm also liabilityed up. So if I can take 100 million in from a strategic buyer for 25, 30%, 51%, recapitalize, put 100 million on the personal balance sheet, set up my generation for the next 20 years, sleep at night, and still run the company for the next 10, I'm in.
Now the difference here obviously is it's not like you got a pile of cash and you're going to buy somebody out and they're going to walk away with the cash.
Right.
In this case,
you're investing in.
You're going public, so you're going to have to make sure that the team that remains is capable enough to run a public company and all that entails.
That's what I'm saying. That's where I think these companies are de-risked at a level, and again, you're still going to find the 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 1,000 you look at, but there's millions of these companies out there that are doing 20 to 100 million a year with no real exit strategy, and the owner at 60 isn't really interested in going public, because again, what am I going to do with another 900 million that I can't do with 100 million at 60? But to your point, would they take the upside later for their generational wealth? Yes. Right. Do they have a resistance to being public? No, because you're buying out them.
Yeah. What I have to decide is, like, I'm not an executive. I'm on the board, right?
Who's going to execute the deal?
Right. Because I'm not looking for a job. And I'm plenty busy with R360 and writing 5 articles a week on Substack and answering all the comments, right? But if I can figure out a way to provide value by leveraging the networks that I have to bring me quality transaction and not garbage,
and talent,
and then take a quick look at it through my radar and say, this looks like something. I'll introduce it to the actual people that are doing like 8 diligence calls a day that are doing the work, maybe it is something that would be interesting, because I don't look at private companies. I look at public companies, but this would be interesting because I could see public companies in these cool areas that we're talking about. And like you said, the companies that I do invest in, like Rolls-Royce, for example, and if you look at all of their suppliers and say, oh,
you're right,
this supplier keeps showing up. Who's that? And then you see
you already have the roadmap, because you wrote about it in the way that you did the diligence on the 8 floors related to just that NVIDIA thing, right? You already have the roadmap, because for everybody that's a trade on the public side that makes it through that gauntlet, they have a supply chain that's probably 80% private. And that private supply chain is probably sitting between 25 to 200 million a year in revenue, owned by someone over 55. And so there's two things that you have. You have the justifier, because you basically can if you think this is the trade, if you think Raytheon, for instance, I'm not plugging a company, you think Raytheon's a trade and you like that story, then down here are 150 targets that they feed that are private, that would love to go public and create a liquidity event for their founder while he sticks around for the upside without caring about it. So now you get a founder who exits for 100 that isn't 35 looking for their $1 billion check, because they just want 100 to go to sleep at night and stick around for the maybe billion later.
I just have to look at more the whole SPAC industry. I'm not an expert. The dynamic.
Well, there's a lot of minefields there. Anybody can research.
I have to make that kind of call as well. But I would think that for a family office, right, that has had this exit and they're sitting on a few $100 million, and they want to be like Buffett and find companies that they can own 20 or 30% of, that already have a track record and have hit $1 billion in enterprise value, and they can hold forever and take them public. It sounds like an interesting thing to at least explore.
I think it's one of those where that family office, short version of it is, if Buffett and Munger did it with 29 or 27 employees, like Omaha only had like 27 people working there. If they could do it with 27, the Berkshire 3.0, with a rewired from the ground up mechanism of a system of record. So this is where I talk about advisory firm of the future, but this is a family office. You have a system of record, you have a system of intelligence, private AI layered on the frontier. You build your own ops stack from ground zero as a family office for the AI economy. Now you could do what Berkshire did with 30 people. You could do it with maybe 7, 6, because you've built a completely operational, sound OpEx strategy around AI. You're not going to buy an AI company. You're building a company.
You're building digital employees, right?
Yeah, you're gonna have 10 full-time analysts and people that are really smart instead of 30, and you're gonna have 1,000 to 10,000 agentic AIs that are controlled by you.
But at the end of the day, if you talk to Buffett and you talk to Charlie Munger, they would make decisions also based on the individual. I was in Israel, and I met a guy that had built a boring tool company, big ass tool company, selling globally. And his problem was that he had 3 sons in the business. And he was in his 60s and he wanted to retire. And the problem was, whatever son he picked, it was going to be a problem, right? From a succession standpoint. Right. So he writes an email to Warren Buffett from Israel. And this was like 2000 and I want to say 6, 7. And he basically said, hey, I have this company. You haven't made a lot of international investments, but I think it's the kind of company that you would like. And
he cold called him?
No, he sent an email, and somehow it got to him. And about 30 days later, he got a letter back from Buffett in pencil. And it basically said, hey, it sounds interesting. Thanks for writing. If you're ever in Omaha, drop by and say hello. So the very next day, he picks up the phone, calls and talks to his secretary, says, oh, by coincidence, I'm going to be in Omaha like in 2 weeks. Is Warren going to be there? Oh, he's out of town then. Well, I could. Bottom line is he went to Omaha, he met, and Buffett made his largest investment overseas into this Israeli tool company. And then after he bought like a minority, I think at first, and then he bought the majority and bought the whole thing out. And it's basically what you said. It was a successful company with an older founder. In this case, he did have family in the business, but he thought it would be much better to have a liquidity event where then it was cash that he was distributing amongst his family, and they weren't getting emotionally charged about who was going to take over and run the business. But that's the biggest challenge situation.
I think the biggest challenge when you're in that meeting with the people in Miami, I think, it comes down to a couple of things. Like you said, you're sitting there on a board. You could be a filter and a curator. You can do those things and that's where it stops but the other side of this is both acquisition of talent and of deals. The deals, it's like focus is going to be key because there's way more deals out there that need something like this. That 33% of them have no exit plan at all. Like they're just going to wind down or just get disappeared and then that
going to people that you trust also. So I got a guy who's probably the number one investor into robotics, and he's a young guy. I've interviewed him. I think I interviewed him on the podcast, Fortunate Fishes, but never went to college, had his first exit at 21, company that he founded at 15, sold it to Google. He became the head of AI at Lyft. Then he went to work with Kathy Ark or at Ark with Kathy Wood. And then he went off on his own, and now he has like a $300 million fund. And he's investing in private companies. He was an early investor in Anthropic. So you get like a dozen guys like that, yourself, other people that have real access, and they know the value because they've been investing. And usually if you invest in round one, you can continue investing, and you have a direct, they can pick up the phone and actually call the founder and say, hey, would you consider this? And if you would, I'll introduce you to a team that I think you should at least talk to. So having filters like that can say, hey, Charlie, I'm telling you, I invested, whatever, a year ago at an $800 million valuation. They're definitely above $1 billion based on these things. Then it would, I think, make sense. I'm not going to be scouring and calling companies. I need a dozen people, just like in the intelligence world. And what I do now, I have people all over the world that I trust, that I've known for 30 years, that give me information. And I think I got to establish that type of network.
You probably already have it. You just have to let them know where to email you, and then make sure that you have a filter on the inbox so you don't get buried, right? But
I have to call them and say, hey,
yeah.
First of all, do you have people in your network with deep relationships? And they're either going to say yes or no. I say, yeah, don't BS me. Just if you don't, that's fine. But if they say absolutely, and I tell them what I'm up to, then it might make sense, but I don't know yet. We'll have to see if I want to do this.
So I have one I want to float by you. I haven't shared anywhere else, but if you have a couple more minutes, I want to float this one by you as a what if scenario, because I think there's an interesting investment class, an asset class around trust and attention that is emerging, but that doesn't have a business model right now.
Right.
And this is going to be harebrained. So I'm going to give you the forlorn, like you can pick this apart. There's probably plenty of holes in this, but if a guy could see the future, subscriptions aren't sustainable. Right. So if you just take that on as maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but I'm going to say it as if it's gospel, right? Just for the effect. Subscriptions aren't sustainable. Here's my quick version why. I have Netflix, I have Prime, I have Disney, I have whatever. There's whatever content in there. But at some point, I'm carrying more monthly costs than I can afford to read. Substack, same thing. But if I subscribe to you, I subscribe to me, I've subscribed to 10 other guys, I'm not consuming it all. Even if I want to, I'm not consuming it all. Now, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe I want it because I'll have my AIs digest it and feed me the best of it. And so I'll pay 10 grand or 100 grand a year of research if I'm like you, because it's worth it. But the average person, which is 99.9% of the planet, can afford to bet on one or two of those things because it's a sunk cost. It's monthly out and it never comes back. And so Substack's model, ultimately, in my opinion, I could be wrong, and please, I hope they don't make this tomorrow, is not going to give this away for free to people that aren't monetizing it. They're going to have a pro plan for guys like you and me, and they're going to try and charge us something unless we're over a certain revenue threshold, because they're still paying for servers. They're still paying for users. And so at some point, they're going to want to go public, and they're going to need to justify their model. And just like Uber went from $17 rides to 47 after they went public, Substack will start to do things that maybe change the environment. So how do you solve that? How do you solve that and make money? And one of my thoughts is, like, I was having a conversation with a guy, James Boultard, who's converting more people to paid per free subscription than anyone else. He outdoes Burry, Doomberg, all of them by a factor of like 36 times. He's got maybe 15, 16,000 frees, and he's got almost 3,000 paid.
What's his name?
Boultard, James Boultard.
Oh, I've seen his.
He's brilliant, but he's not even using.
He's in finance, right?
He's in finance, and he's got a room every day of 2,500 people that are in a Discord, and that basically he trades his book openly, and he has a proprietary data set of things that he does, options and puts and things like that. And he basically just gives you 150 ideas a day, and he executes 8 in real time. His book's up 60% ARR this year. He's up an average of like 40-something% over the last 4 years he's been doing it. So people are paying him because they get their money back, right? Follows trades. It's the thing you don't want to do, but he's doing it and he's converting. What's my point? I sat there with him, interviewing him. He's the only interview he's ever done. And I was grateful to have him. And I said, you know what? Your problem is you have a real asset here that Bloomberg can't afford to buy, and they want to desperately build, but you'll never sell. Because if you're making $3 million a year off Substack and your portfolio is making you 11, and all you're doing is showing what you're doing in real time, and people are paying you for that, and then you're compounding that, you have a business that you can run and be with your kids 5 days a week. You have a community that loves you, that you love to be with, that's keeping each other accountable, and you're making $30 million a year. You're not going to sell that. Like, if I came and offered you $150 million for your Substack today to go buy it, what are you going to go do? Like, you're going to be bored. Like, you're not going to be happy. My point is, the people that crack the code on that don't have a liquidity or an exit strategy for that workload, but they don't necessarily want one either. The media companies are starved. News companies are irrelevant. All the news is happening on Substack. So how do you solve that and create a financial win? And it's not that inventive, but it's like this notion of you underwrite, not public offerings, but you underwrite essentially the ability for crowdfund. So instead of subscribing to you or me, I could own a piece of that distribution stream. So instead of being a founding member and being locked into that, I could actually own. Now, you never give up more than 51%. So no one ever gets to tell Charlie what he can write or Chris what he can say. But our audience now participates with us. So if we grow by 1,000 subscribers and all of a sudden things thrown off 30, 40, 50 grand a month, our subscribers are getting their pro rata for their share. And so now you create a media company that is at scale, independent journalists, independent thought leaders around these 31 categories. And you create the underwriting, you become the Goldman Sachs or the Berkshire of media platforms that are independent, where you don't have to
frame your hypothesis in 20 seconds. Like, what's the hypothesis?
The hypothesis is that signal will continue to be more valuable than noise. Noise will be deafening beyond where it is today, which means the internet is permanently broken. AI expands that problem.
But I understand that, but the whole thesis was about the subscription model. Like, if you look at
how could I create a multiplier effect of the income I've generated on my successful Substack without having to sell out control and without having to retire? How could I create $30 million worth of capital into if I'm James, right? How could I create 30 million but not give up the soul of what I'm doing?
Like, those are big numbers, and I don't think about it that way, but Barry Weiss.
Rogan got 100 million from Spotify.
No, I understand. But look, Barry Weiss left the New York Times, and she came to Substack, and she started Free Press, right?
Right.
So in about a year and a half, she had, I don't know, let's say she had 5 million subscribers, something like that.
Yeah.
She went out and she raised $20 million at about $100 million valuation. And she took the 20 million for her Substack, and she hired all these journalists from the Wall Street Journal, other places, and took the 5 million in revenue in a year to 20 million in revenue on Substack.
Mm-hmm.
And then she basically got bought out for 150 million, but it also involved a contract to go be the head of news at NBC for 100 million.
Right.
And she is kind of the success story of doing something like that, but she substantially increased the content she was putting out, the people who were reading under her banner. Now, the problem that I see with Substack is the average creator on a yearly basis that has a yearly subscription is churning 50% a year. So let's say the average is a 40% open rate on your stuff, people are reading, and you're losing 50%. So if you've built and you're making 100,000 on Substack in a year, and you've left your job, and the next year comes by and you go from 100 to 50, that's a huge
and that's the problem. That's why I say subscriptions don't work, because the churn happens because of a lot of reasons. But one of those reasons is just, do I still want to pay for it? So here's the second part. That's the hairy brain part, because everything you said about Barry is fine. That works. That's available. And that's going to keep getting more valuable. That's not what I'm talking about.
She's one in a million. I don't think anyone else.
I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, how do you go downstream 20, 30% to someone who never is going to be at that scale, but who has a thriving community, who's making money, but who wants sustainable and reduce churn and also monetize. Now, here's the really harebrained part. Only you might even get this and not think I'm batshit crazy because you're a Bitcoiner. Okay, so I can't get yield on Bitcoin today, maybe 20 bips if I'm in whatever, right? But there's yield on stables, and we're about to pass clarity. So we're going to have these on-ramps of stables.
But you're going down a rabbit hole that I mean, I think what we're trying to solve for is, how do you make this Substack subscription model work for you? And, obviously, Citrini, who's number one, is producing research that people are buying, and he's making people money, but you have a top tier. So I don't pay $1,000 for Citrini. I pay 10 because I want the institutional research and I want to be on the weekly calls. And I know him personally. I've developed a relationship with him. But, when I came to Substack, I wasn't looking ever to make money or have a job. I only wanted 100 founding members because I wanted to be able to attend to them. And all of a sudden it grew out of hand. And
think about music. Take it out of finance, because here's where the use case is in my mind, right? Think about your daughter's music, for instance. Yeah. If she started to use Substack or any platform, I don't care what it is, whatever, right?
I'm more, the novel is more where I'm thinking I'm doing a public service to 1 million potential creative writers who have a novel or fiction in them, that they could come serialize their novel on Substack and earn a living.
Right.
And disrupt the whole publishing business.
Yeah. So the disruption of publishing and media, in my standpoint, is these crowds are going to continue to gather because trust and context is going to drive power law dynamics.
I agree with the trust part.
To the artist. So as that happens, what's the business model? Subscriptions go away and become total value locked. So imagine now, instead of me paying $20 a month, $100 a month, $700 a year, it doesn't matter what the number is, $20 an album, $20 a book, doesn't matter. Instead of me doing that, I have a TVL, a total value locked, that I'm staking with that network. So I go, I'm a Charlie Garcia guy. Here's my $1,000 worth of stables or Bitcoins parked on your TVL. That's now generating a gross yield, because if you have 20,000 people at 1,000, now your TVL, right, is $20 million in TVL earning 4.5%, 5%. That's the income. I never leave it out of my wallet. I just time lock it. So I just time lock it with you and I access whatever the $1,000 level is. Now you're speaking in Miami and you're like, you know what? I'm going to go have dinner and cigars over at my favorite lounge bar. Anyone with 5,000 TVL on their account can come join me. I'm now saving as a proxy in my own wallet to access experiences with the star or the person I want to go spend time with. You're not taking from me. You're adding to your aggregate TVL, which earns you a management fee.
I think you need to simplify the model. The way that I think of it is like, I always think about value. Like, how can I give 10x the value to a subscriber of Capital Mischief? And I'm only thinking about value. Well, when I first started, I looked like some people publish once a week. I looked at like Doomberg and others that have been around for a while, and maybe they do like one free article a month. Some people have no monthly subscriptions. It's only founders and yearly. So I said, well, it was rare to find somebody that was publishing 5 times a week. And of course,
and on a theme, you have a very specific what happens on what day. I mean, you were one of the people I know that did that. Yeah.
So I thought, hey, I would enjoy doing this. I think it's the right thing. I do 2 free pieces a week. Plus, I'm going to answer comments, which is very time consuming. And so I'm going to do all this value. And I was just doing it as a hobby. I never was going to turn this on to make money at all. And it was really just that somebody said, hey, you're not really going to grow unless you're paid, because Substack keeps 10%. And one of the big reasons I went was I'm writing a novel that I want to change the world with from a faith perspective. So I need a large audience on Substack where I have and then invite them to read. And it, and things just kind of got out of hand and went viral. And what really amazed me is this truth part. Like, people are looking for someone they trust. I'm not, it's not that I'm always right. I'm wrong a lot, but I'll admit it. Like, hey, I fucked that up. I screwed that up, and I'll take a beating for it. And I'll fess like, hey, this was my hypothesis. I was wrong. And anything that I recommend or say, this is what I'm buying, but these are the negatives and the downsides. I try to be honest with myself. I try, even with the Trump thing, where I said, hey, these are the 20 accomplishments, but honestly, we also got to take into mind there's a downside here, even though it may be an upside for the followers. There's not, there's a flip side to everything. So I think just being authentic and honest, and I don't know what my churn and retention will be, but hopefully by trying to always think, like, how can I give 10x value and not think of monetizing? Like, the last thing I want to do is be Barry Weiss and create a business.
Yeah, me too. Like, by the way, I don't want that either. That's why I'm saying I'm only curious in having this mental exercise, because I will not do that model either. And I don't think other people want to. So I'm just going, well, I wonder what that model is. To me, something around access being so I can stake my claim with you, but I can unlock things, but I'm not staking my money. I'm staking my time already. I'm reading you.
Let me tell you the most disappointing thing for me on Substack is, and I was on with their engineers last week because I'm really upset about it, is the amount of scams and fraudsters that use my picture. And there's a guy who I knew like 10 years ago, and he's not even 40 yet, that gave one of these scamsters like $20,000 that supposedly I was going to be managing the money in their account. And he finally texted me and like, dude, I would never in a million years ask you for money to manage. And then I was this summer with a couple in Switzerland, and the woman's 80 years old, French, and she's a writer. And I told her about Substack. So she did her first thing on Substack, and then she liked or commented on some note that I did. And next thing you know, my wife is like, hey, are you like texting with this woman? And I'm like, no, I emailed her maybe a week ago, but I don't even have her cell phone. Well, it turns out that on one of my notes, this scammer talks to her, gets the phone number, gets her on WhatsApp, and she actually gave passwords away, and they were asking for money. And I was so embarrassed. My wife had to call and say, hey, it's not Charlie, it says Chorley with an O.
Also in a weird font. I mean,
and they can't detect images right now. So if you put an image of a QR code, Substack can't. And I think how many people have been scammed by these?
Well, I just had to say this. I literally had to say this. So when I announced that you and I were doing the second one, it's the first time it's happened to me, because I haven't been a big enough deal yet, right? You are. The first time it happened to me was literally less than 48 hours ago. Someone created a thing called Wealth Matters. It didn't even have a picture with it. It followed me and it tried to scam me. And so that's the only reason I saw it. And I'm like, it's interpreting me trying to scam the very guy it's doing. So I just put a thing out. I screenshotted it. I wrote fake on it. I put it on notes. No one sees notes, but I put it on notes anyway. I reported it to Substack and said, listen, like, just for the record, I'm never going to ask you for your money on Substack. I'm never going to give you my WhatsApp. I'm never going to I'm not going to do those things. So just like it happened in crypto on Twitter, right? Everybody was doing the whole, they would play this video and there'd be the frame around it and says, give me 1 Bitcoin and I'll send you back 2. And it's like,
well, you know what? My wife, Christina, always looks at me and her question is always, are you having fun?
Right.
And that's the answer, because I would do this for free, right? I did 108 posts for free, and I would do this for free, but my time is valuable, and I do and I work my butt off doing this, and I am having fun. And after this, I'm going to open my cigar box and have one of my Monte Cristos and have some Old Pappy before I got to go to the train station. And I love the community, so I enjoy it, and I'm helping people make money, not lose money. And you know, I always say that, you know, if you just surrender to the grand architect of the universe and just let happen what's supposed to happen. And if you lose half of your subscribers, guess what? You'll gain new ones. And I'm trying to develop a personal relationship. And it's interesting that there's some people that always comment on the articles, but I know there's a guy that flew down from Boston, all right? And he bribed me with a bottle of like Old Pappy. And he bought it at an auction. And
like said, I'm going to bring it down. I want to meet you to hand it to you. Type of thing.
This wasn't the bottle. I already drank the one that he brought. But I decided to meet with him, and I went to a nice steakhouse. And his story was that he went to college, it didn't work out well. He dropped out, and he got into software engineering, and he self-taught himself. And he had a group of friends that were starting a Christian school, and he volunteered to do the software for the school. And he did such a great job designing it that the next thing you know, a high school heard about it, a private high school, and he did theirs. Well, 20 years later, he's in 2,500 schools in 35 countries. He sold his business, I think, during the pandemic. He flies down with his private plane. And I love, you know, stories like that. And he reads everything that I write. I think he listens, but he's never commented ever, like on any article on, you know, it's like So some people I know, they just like to read, or I'll run into them. I'll say, "Hey, I love what you wrote." I said, "I didn't even know you read my stuff. Why don't you make a comment?" But some people do, some people don't.
Well, and I will tell you, here's how I find peace in that too. Even though the competitor of me is always trying to, how can I get better? How can I build more value? How can I unlock whatever I'm missing because I'm too stuck, right? So I'm always trying to improve it. But at the end of the day, at peace, and I think you'll resonate with this, I'll tell one personal story. It's real quick. So a woman named Freya, and I can't remember her last name now, and I don't want to look it up, but a woman named Freya in Germany passed away at age 51 a week and a half ago, something like that. Now, why does it matter? I don't know Freya. I never met her, but she is probably one of the most significant people in my life. And here's why, in my wife's life. My wife and I have
what's your wife's name?
Brienne. So my wife and I have 3 unbelievable children. One of them is about to be 15. The other ones are just about to turn 3 in November. So they're 2 3/4, right? Twins. And why is there a 12-year gap? Well, there's a 12-year gap for the reasons that many people could probably intuit, right? There was no rhyme or reason to it. Nothing was wrong with she or I. But for whatever reason, we just couldn't get there, right? So we had, I think, up to 7 different miscarriages. We had multiple tries of IVF. We had multiple things like that, all kind of quietly. And my wife, to her credit, never felt like this wasn't supposed to happen. She just was like, I know, I just believe I'm supposed to be a mother to more children. And, I was kind of like at that point where I'm like, I'm just happy I'm a father.
How old was she when the twins were born?
Well, we had our first, she was 32 when we had our first. 31 pregnant, and then 32 when we had our first. The twins were born, and she was, the day they were born, she was 43.
Wow.
So she had twins naturally at 43.
Wow.
But the reason why we have those twins, is divine, number one. There is no question when I look at them every night, when I look at them, I go, oh my God, like, of course, these were the ones. We just had to wait for them to kind of be in the mystical, goo-goo and get here. That was a 12-year wait. We did all this stuff. We efforted. We paid all the right people. We went to multiple doctors. We failed. Freya was this woman in Germany who was in her 40s and who had gone to this place called Pronatal in Prague, Czechoslovakia, actually Karlovy Vary specifically, which was where all the German people went. And Freya was on YouTube, and Freya was doing a thing for women around infertility, around whatever. And Freya had her babies and had these twins. So my wife found Freya, but what more importantly she found was where Freya went in Prague, in Czech, to get this done. And so then she found out about this place that's been operating for 26 years because she consumed the content. She never talked with Freya. She never comments. That's not my wife. My wife doesn't want to be on social media at all. She didn't do anything. She never said a word. Freya doesn't know we exist. But because of Freya, we have twins. Because in February of 2023, when we had our 5th miscarriage in a row, after 2 prior to that, and it was like, okay, what are we going to do? My wife was like, I think we should do one more try. Let's go to Czech. And we literally 30 days later flew to Czech, to this place we'd never been, went in, and spent 2.5 weeks over there and inserted 2 twins because of the experience and the knowledge and the thing about we had with this. And I say that because 2 of the 3 most precious assets in my life came from someone who doesn't know I exist. She died at 51 from stomach cancer after giving birth to her 4th child 10 days ago. And everyone was ragging her about, oh, you should have stopped, you should have whatever. And so I went to that funeral online. I haven't been to too many other funerals. I say that because you and I never know. Whose life we're changing. And I will forever love this woman, Freya, and my wife will too. And she doesn't know I exist.
That's
she's no longer here. So that's why we do it.
I want to leave you with something because you're a numerologist, I found out. And
I'm many things, but I like numerology. Yes.
Yeah. And you told me that 59 is a very special number for you. And I think you're charging $59 for one of your subscriptions, right?
Well, just for the annual. So basically it's like, it's 30 something bucks a month. And then if you buy for the year, you're getting 10 I'm doing that through the end of the month because I'm trying to get my orange check. Because when I started on Substack, like you, I was just doing it for free. I had a bunch of people that tried to pay me. I couldn't get the money through because I was Stripe. So I have like 840 some odd people that are, paid members, but I never got my orange check because it didn't run through their rails.
Oh, got it.
So I was like, oh, well, I would like an orange check. And then I'm also like, well, how can I be cute and variable? I want everybody to sign up for Charlie that's not. So I just knocked it down to 59 because 59 was my football number, but more importantly, it deduces to 5, and 5 is the life force of Catalyst. And so I think these conversations are a catalyst for people.
Well, let me tell you, I'm going to leave you with a gift, and this is a big one. So, my mother was a devout Catholic, and every day she prayed the rosary. So the standard 5-decade rosary holds 59
no kidding.
53 Hail Marys, and 6 for our fathers. And every Catholic who prays it daily without thinking about it is running their fingers over the number 59, which is arguably the most physically handled number in Christian devotional life.
Wow, that's incredible. I did not know that one. And you didn't know that you were born on the 28th. And when you do your full birthday, it deduces to 1. And 1 is basically the number for leader and of major movements. And I think you have demonstrated that unconsciously on Substack. And then this is our episode 53, which deduces to 8. So it's about prosperity. But again, prosperity, hopefully across net happiness and net worth. You listen to Charlie, you'll get wealthier. Hopefully you listen to both of us, you'll get happier. That's the key. And then our first one was 9 because it was 18, episode 18, serendipitously, because we didn't even know we were going to do it on Substack way back in April. It just was like, you didn't want to do Google. I didn't either. And then it was like, well, let's try Substack. We'll do it live there. That was episode 18. And 9 is the number of completion and renewal. So 9 always returns the other thing to itself. So that's why 59. 59 deduces to 5. Wow. If you did 99, it deduces to 9.
Well, I have to get ready to hit a train station to take the train to Miami to go investigate whether I want to be on a public board of a $250 million SPAC that is going to be looking to acquire a $1 billion private company. I don't know. It's 50-50 right now. I'll know more.
I'm sure we'll all know more on Saturday and Sunday when we learn how the week netted out.
Yeah, I got. It's just the whole thing about being under the arm of the SEC, and I'm so happy I'm not regulated. But what final questions do you have? I really enjoyed having a chat with you. I feel kind of bad because we didn't answer a lot of questions.
The chat seemed to have frozen. So what we'll do is when I republish this, for everyone who's listening is on replay, you already have it. For those who are listening live still, it looks like the chat room and also the counter kind of froze about an hour ago. So I have no idea how many are in the room now and how many questions you guys have asked. But what we will do is I always publish now for Atomic Level. I'll do a draft. This will drop definitely by tomorrow morning, maybe later today, but I'll do a full write-up of the article version. It'll have this replay in it in its entirety. It'll have all the show notes, but it'll be written like a story so that you can read it, and if you don't want to just watch the interview again. And inside of there, we'll do as best we can to also answer. I'll do my best to answer any of the questions that we can from my perspective. I know Charlie well enough to know that somewhere between a train ride and a plane ride and a cigar and something else will probably be in there very active. So I would love to have the engagement. Again, I don't want to force it. It's natural on your audience. I think it's something that you treasure. I love being part of it. If it happens on mine more, I'd be grateful. Several people have done that this week, and it's been fun to interact and learn what you care about. I just want to know what you want to hear about. And I think, Charlie, you're doing the same thing. You just want to know like what's resonating, what's not. But for all of the people out there that you're the FRIA too, I think they're more than grateful. And on behalf of them, I say thank you also for the time today.
Yeah. No, I see one question I'll answer. Reserva Capital. It says, we often measure success by financial capital. Do you believe the next generation of leaders should instead be accountable for growing multiple forms? And big believer that wealth is more than money. And what we're trying to teach people that real wealth is something I call fishes. So yes, it's financial capital, but it's also intellectual, social, human, emotional, and spiritual. And I think you got to develop mastery in all 6 of those verticals. And as a family leader, show up for your children, your family, and build those 6 verticals as well. I like the name fishes. Jesus was a fisherman, fisher of men. And even the Pope, every new Pope has a ring, and there always has 2 fishes, and they design it around that. But I do think that money is like the least, obviously when you don't have it and you're living paycheck to paycheck, it's a whole different thing. But I know people worth hundreds of millions of dollars and their life can be a mess. And the most important thing is really love, family, your relationships, helping others, creating a legacy, being healthy, eating well. People tell me about my vices, and yes, if I didn't smoke Monte Cristos and I didn't drink bourbon, I would live longer, but life wouldn't be as fun and interesting for me. So I will sacrifice maybe a few years of longevity for a little bit of joy in this life. So
yeah, and I think you and I both have an appreciation for Perkins's book Die with Zero, and you made a funny comment back to me when I was 4 margaritas deep reading one of your posts a couple weeks back about that's a Die with Zero Wednesday. I'm like, yeah, I guess it was. So anyway, thank you so much for being here, Charlie. I mean, this is the real juice for me, like the interviewing and being able to bring the ideas, the experience, the wisdom that someone like yourself has to whoever is listening is kind of how I see myself being useful. It gives me purpose. It gives me dopamine. So I thank you for indulging that and also going far beyond our 2 hours of scheduled time. Wow. And for all those who tuned in and stayed with us or listening on replay, thanks so much. Please subscribe to them if you're not. Upgrade if you can. If you can't, the Saturdays are worth everything, even if you're on your way up. And that's what I appreciate about them. Same thing. Atomic Level will always be free. I will never charge for these interviews, but I do want your email. So if you don't mind, subscribe, and we'll bring you as much value as we can from both sides. Well, love you, brother. Next time I want to see pictures of wife and kids. Yeah, well, we'll do that in private. We don't share those online, but we'll do those in private. When I get there and we have a Monte Cristo, maybe you can meet them. Yeah, that's even better. Thanks, brother. Thank you. All right. Love you, brother. Bye-bye.